playing you the trailblazers
and innovators.
This is Karen Lang on Double J.
Kevin Shields of My Bloody Valentine. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to Double J.
Oh, thanks a lot. Thank you.
And it's an exciting time for My Bloody Valentine. You've signed to a new record label in Domino Records, and your full catalogue is now available digitally for streaming for the very first time. And then there's new physical editions of all the releases as well. So, how do you feel about all of that? It must be tremendously exciting.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's great to just finally get everything back out there. It kind of, I mean, we haven't had vinyl. In fact, we haven't really had vinyl available commercial, as in shops and things like that. We had them on our website, our own website. But other than that, we've had no vinyl. We had no vinyl available since 91, actually.
Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, the MBV album we released ourselves, and a lot of vinyl got out there because we sold it to literally whoever would buy it for us. We just said, literally, give us the money and we'll sell it to you. And various broker type people would buy thousands of them and sell them to shops and things. So they did kind of get out there, but it was quite sporadic, and they disappeared. And I see them for stupid prices on the internet now. And but yeah, so it's basically no distribution or anything of any normal sort. And then with Loveless and Isn't Anything, we just had the vinyl that came out in 88 and 91, which disappeared after a while, and then we did some remasters of full analog versions that we had out in 2017. And that was strictly for our website. It was a kind of deal we did with Sony, because we were still with Sony at the time. And they allowed us to do that. They said we can do it if we'd pay for it and do it ourselves and only sell it through our website. And we did that, and as a limited kind of thing, we just wanted to get it out there, really. Just the idea of getting analog versions out there. So they're going to be now properly available. And then I did some new cuts as well of Loveless and Isn't Anything. And they're a bit more I did my best with the analog, which will never end. I think I'll always be trying again, but I used some high res digital files to just try and see if I could get kind of like everything that's good about the CD, but make it a way better. It's like a 24-bit 96K, no compression, and just put that on vinyl. And have all the advantages that brings, because there is some, actually. So, so I'm just really glad this is a kind of a full range of everything, as good as possible. And that people can get it without kind of paying silly money. Yeah.
The digital versions that are up for streaming, did you have any reservations around releasing your music digitally? I know it's fantastic for people to discover it. It's going to make it much more widely available, and there's been a lot of calls for it.
Yeah,
but in some ways, the digital listening experience is a little unsatisfying.
Yeah, but then again, in reality, I've discovered so much music on my phone, and I've even been in the strange situation sometimes of loving a song and then getting the CD and, kind of going, oh, I didn't realize there was so much bass and that doesn't sound as good as I thought it would. You know what I mean? It's kind of, I've actually fallen in love more than once with songs on YouTube or whatever digital platform. And kind of found that I liked that. What I fell in love with was part of that sound, So, and now, luckily, with most digital platforms, there's the opportunity to basically have higher quality versions of everything. Like CD quality, and I think Spotify are bringing a CD quality service in now as well. It's kind of like digital itself, is okay, You know, there's nothing wrong with digital. It's just sometimes if the quality is too low, you know, obviously it's kind of, you know, you're not going to get what you can get from it, what you do get from music, you know, in the same way. But other than that, it's, I would be a hypocrite if I didn't say that I've enjoyed too much stuff just coming off any old low quality platform. You know what I mean? And it wouldn't matter. It was just that sometimes music is that it has that quality. You know that it doesn't matter how you're hearing it. You know. So
that seems to stand in contrast to, you know, the general perception of you as an audiophile and a perfectionist and someone who loves to tinker with
but you know what
My
it
Bloody
is?
Valentine's sound.
Yeah, but it's more like I just kind of get it as good as possible and as correct as possible. That's all it is. You know, I don't believe there's such thing as perfection. It's just it just looks like that from the outside sometimes because people would maybe not understand why I might go to such great lengths to get something correct. Basically, you know, it has to pass the quality control, you know, kind of thing. For some people that seems really extreme, and for me, I'm just trying to get it right, basically, you know. But I don't really feel as a concept, you know, I don't really think of myself as a perfectionist at all. And even as an audiophile, it's kind of, I do like to have good quality. You know, obviously in the studio, I've got as good quality as I can have, and with headphones, I spent crazy money on headphones, and you know, and I got lots of record players and lots of different speakers and lots of amplifiers and all sorts of stuff. But I often enjoy music, and a lot of engineers, I've spoken to and producers, their home system is often quite basic because enjoying music is often not about hearing it in the best system. Sometimes when you hear it on a really good system, you're going, wow, that's a really bad cut, or that's a really bad mastering job. Do you know what I mean? And then you hear it on a cheap system and it sounds pretty great. So I'm kind of into that as well. I'm into the kind of lo-fi aspect of sound, you know.
Yes.
And I used to love sitting with ghetto blasters facing me, you know, and just blasting the ghetto blaster, you know, literally having music playing really loud on a ghetto blaster a foot away from my head, you know, on my lap in bed. You know, it was one of my favorite things to do, you know. It's whatever kind of works, you know.
Yeah. So when you were doing that, the ghetto blaster thing, are we talking 10 years ago? Or are we talking when you were a teenager?
That would have been actually the whole time from 88. Like we lived in squats, basically, you know, lived quite a free. I had a bag, you know, that was my possessions in life, was a bag, you know, and whatever instruments we had stayed in the rehearsal space somewhere locked away, and there would be a guitar lying around. But it was like, yeah, we didn't have even having a hi-fi system was quite alien, you know. So yeah, all the music pretty much I listened to for quite a while. I mean, I did have record players too, but after a while, but for a good 3 or 4 years of my life, that was pretty much how I listened to music, you know. Or there was a phenomenon in London at the time where there was a lot of markets selling secondhand stuff, and the two things that we used to pick up all the time for like a couple of pounds, £2 or £3, were these little not dance sets, but those 3-in-1 like record players would had a radio tape and a little record player with a set of small speakers, and you pick them up really cheap. But I found the Getter Blaster far more powerful and more exciting sounding.
Yeah.
It was one of my favorite ways to hear music, pretty much into the mid-90s, even, you know.
Were you listening to cassettes then, were you? Like a lot of people were discovering music on cassette then.
Yeah. I mean, cassette. I grew up in the era where cassettes were the main way of we recorded music off the radio, you know. I used to record John Peel all the time. And we had a actually a really terrible reception in Ireland when I was young, when I was a teenager. And so I'd have all these John Peel songs taped off John Peel with crazy whooshing noises and kind of like, you know, all this crazy out of tune radio effects. I've got loads of tapes like that. But yeah, cassettes were the thing, pretty much when I was growing up. You know, I heard so many. I had so many favorite albums that were on cassette. Even when Loveless came out in America, I think 35% of all the sales were on cassette. You know, it was just kind of normal. So yeah, a lot of music I heard would have been on cassette.
What sort of music were you actively chasing back then?
Well, I kind of got into music pretty like really started going to gigs and stuff in '79, and it was kind of like the post-punk era. Like it was so punk around, but it was more like Public Image Limited as opposed to the Sex Pistols. You know, it was more. There was a song called Public Image by Public Image Limited that was like the big thing, really. Like when we first started playing, our first gig was all punk songs, but we also learned how to play that, and that felt like, you know, that was something special, you know. But I guess it was basically a lot of post-punk music of that era, you know, and a lot of electronic music. All the early sort of synth type stuff, like the early Human League. Like I'd missed Kraftwerk, but we kind of got into them, you know, at that period as well. But it was basically a band called DAF. That had a particular track that was very influential, actually, on my way of thinking. And
which one?
It was called what is it called? Do the Mussolini.
Yeah,
terrible,
I know that song.
Yeah, but it's the music I just absolutely loved, because it's basically a simple sort of bass synth line, but it's kind of bending in and out of tune, you know. And someone told me it was probably on some synths you've got a thing called there's a drift on them, where they drift in and out of tune, and you can actually you can make it worse, basically. But to make it more in tune, you can make it have more drift. And I believe that as opposed, it wasn't done with a pitch wheel, and it was just really fascinating to me. That was something that really was a real standout sort of track at that time.
Yeah.
But then there was also a lot of guitar music. Like basically we discovered the Birthday Party. Funnily enough, they became, if anyone heard our first album, you can kind of clearly see that we had a strong Birthday Party kind of influence, especially on a couple of tracks, which nearly sounded like giant parodies nearly, you know.
Which songs in particular do you think?
Well, there's a song called Don't Cramp My Style, which is on an album called This Is Your Bloody Valentine. It came out in '85. And that's like really extremely Birthday Party like, kind of to a ridiculous level. And but we were young and we were just playing around with music. But we loved that. Was one of the big kind of bands for us when we became My Bloody Valentine. That was a shared love of that music. So yeah, that was a big thing.
Yeah. Well, I guess all bands, when they start out, to some extent, you know, ape their major influences, or just try to work out what some of their favourite bands were doing and how they were doing it.
Yeah, I mean, well, funnily enough, it was Roland Howard from the Birthday Party. He used to play a white Jaguar, and when we left Ireland in '84, I had this I bought it on HP, this Yamaha SG guitar, which was a real classic, like Susie and the Banshees and, you know, Magazine and all those bands. They all used, it was kind of the guitar of that era. And I didn't want to take it when we left Europe. I kind of wanted to keep it safe, because we were going into an adventure of just traveling, you know, with a few bags and cheap instruments. And I went to the shop anyway, and because of Roland Howard, and playing his Jaguar, I saw it was an Ibanez copy, basically. And that was my first guitar for when we left Ireland and, you know, went out into the world, you know.
Yeah.
And that was because of Roland, basically. I just love that shape, you know, and I was like, oh, it's a bit like Roland's guitar. So I didn't even know what they were called.
You got a chance to see Roland play with the Birthday Party?
No, I saw him play with these Mortal Souls, and a few other types, various Roland type things that he did after the birthday party. He was around London and doing stuff, and so I did see that. I did see him play live, but I never saw him with the birthday party, unfortunately. Never saw the birthday party live. We were in Ireland and they never came over. So it was hardly any bands came over in those days. So it was kind of normal.
Yeah. It feels like Roland Howard, I don't want to get too caught up in him, but it feels like Roland Howard is getting talked about more and more, really, as you know, for his very unique guitar style.
Yeah, he was truly a genius, you know. I mean, really, it was just like he had a way of just approaching the guitar that was, you know, it was very different, you know. It was, yeah. I always perceived it very much in a kind of nearly like a living creature, you know. The way he had a way of playing the guitar that reminded me of a wild animal that was being tamed somehow, you know.
Yeah,
it was, you know, but yeah, he was a huge influence basically on me.
The "Don't Cramp My Style" track you were talking about before from the first mini album, you know, it sort of traces this connection between obviously the Cramps and the way that they approached music, you know, the sort of distortion that was on the mic and on the guitars, and you know, the way that connected with what was happening with the birthday party and that kind of rough blues. You know, there was like some really interesting experimental edges to post-punk, and that ties in with Public Image as well, and other bands in the UK that in that period of time there was like this sort of darkness around, like some of the most interesting music that was being made had this kind of darkness to it. Was that what attracted you?
I guess so. I mean, it for that time, it somehow seemed really natural. You know, it was weird. You know, like looking back, you know, like the kind of that post-punk thing, and then the derogatory term goth, you know, that was used. You know, but then you know, because you had bands like we saw the connection between bands like The Cure and the Birthday Party. You know, and like people were being very expressive and very experimental, and so they were experimenting with themselves physically, like visually and musically. You know, it was there was a sense of unrestriction, and you know, if you just transported that time, like say the early '80s, you know, into from the late '70s to early '80s, and the way people were behaving to the mid '90s, you know, if you took out electronic music, you know, it was things that became more, a bit more conservative, you know, I guess that would be a way of putting it. Like with Britpop, for example, you know, there was something about being, you know, like the guy on the street kind of thing, trying to appeal to that kind of quality that nobody was trying to appeal to, you know, in the early '90s or '80s, sorry. You know, you know, so we definitely came from that world very much.
Kevin, can you tell us what albums or artists were particularly special to you when you were a teenager, when you started buying your own music?
I guess it was kind of punk stuff. So like the first Buzzcocks album, I got the first Public Image album. At the same time, I discovered the Ramones and bought all the records I had up to that point. Up to that point, it was all like mostly in '79. Really, I just went through a big, you know, really got much more into music. So that was really my period of time, I guess, was, and I discovered all that stuff in '78, but I wasn't buying so much of it really. I don't remember buying too many records. Just sort of picking up on TV and liking it, you know. Like I could have bought stuff in '78, but you know, but it was basically it was The Cure, you know, but that was a little bit later. But you know, The Cure were also like a big discovery. But what was the question again?
just, yeah, what artists and music did you
Oh,
gravitate
as a
towards when
teenager,
you
of
were?
course, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. But yeah, it was essentially that. It was that post punk phase. So I was sort of picking up on a lot of punk nearly after the fact, and discovering all this new really cool post punk music at the same time. So it was it was that kind of stuff. It was a mixture, as I said, of like Public Image Unlimited and maybe Cabaret Voltaire were a bit later, but I just remember really liking that and Clock DVA.
Mm.
Yeah, just but yeah, it was more punk stuff. Pretty much I was just getting the Clash and the Sex Pistols and a lot of stuff like that. And also the newer punk stuff like the Cockney Rejects and the Angelic Upstarts and that kind of thing. Just well, it was still kind of interesting.
Did Irish punk play a part in all of that? So undertones?
Yes. I mean, I love the Undertones. I had the first Undertones album. That was a really big album for me. Teenage Kicks is in fact one of my favorite songs of all time, and also one of my favorite productions of all time. I think it's one of the best, most perfectly recorded records. And I actually became friends with Damien O'Neill, and I picked his brain many times about how they made that record. It was one of those perfect moments where everything just clicked. But yeah, they were a big band for me, and at the time in '79, in fact, there was quite a big punk scene, but in Northern Ireland. So there was a band in particular called the Outcasts, who were they were very it was real, pretty brutal, basic barcore punk rock music. And they were all a mixture of brothers and cousins, and they all looked a bit like skinheads, and they were all a bit scary looking, but they were kind of amazing. It wasn't shouty punk. It was kind of, the vocals were slightly melodic in some kind of way, but they were like a real favorite of that time. But yeah, the Northern Irish punk scene was them, Rudy, a band called Roof Rex, Stiff Little Fingers, which we played one of their songs at our first ever gig, and
really,
it was the first time we ever played live as being Column. We started in 1980, and 6 months later we did our first little punk gig. Doing covers of Sex Pistols, Ramones, Cockney Rejects, Angelic Upstarts, Just Little Fingers, Motorhead. I love Motorhead. At that time.
I get that. I can hear. I mean, I get that now you say it.
Yeah, I mean, So Motorhead were another band I really liked. I thought they were quite cool, brilliant. I like things like Crass. I don't know if you're Crass, but I like that. And, I was just trying to find anything that was kind of like that. And music was moving towards. It was getting a little bit like less energy and more kind of heady. And the worst of it became that new romantic-y kind of 80s-y thing, and the best of all that kind of was like Susie and the Banshees and The Cure and Killing Joke. I do remember, like, when I was 17, in fact, I made a solemn promise to myself, in fact, because so many of the records I was discovering, the punk stuff in particular, were kind of after it all happened. It was happening in 77, 78, and 79. I was buying it like 2 years, in 79, 80. And I was like, one thing I will never do is, I didn't want to, I just feel like I made this promise to myself, I'll never make that third crap record, or the much more kind of softer, kind of like, now I'm a musician, now I'm more serious type record. You know what I mean? That people seem to keep on doing. They were making these incredibly brilliant raw records, and they would kind of go all overly complicated, and overly, too much kind of production value, and in a way that was, production I love, but when it's just about sounding nice, I don't love it. So I just remember making that promise to myself. I remember just thinking, and never do that. Basically, if you can't make a good record, don't make a record at all, which I kind of stuck to, which is why I haven't made many records. Because I've only been able to make a few good records. And that's the truth.
All of a sudden, your entire output makes perfect sense in the context of those early punk bands that you fell in love with.
Yep.
And what about your family? What music was playing in the house when you were growing up?
I mean, funnily enough, one of my favorite records of when I was getting into music was the Hollies, and my parents had bought that. It was something in their record collection. It was a record called Bus Stop by the Hollies, an album. I remember listening to that an awful lot, but mostly when we lived in America, my parents had emigrated from Ireland to America when they were teenagers, or late teens or early 20s. I think my mom was like 20 or something when she went over there, I think, maybe. But my dad was a teenager, and they were like part of the Irish community thing. When St. Patrick's was a big deal, and it was in New York, and so it was always a big deal. And I heard quite a bit of Irish music, and that kind of. Weirdly enough, I remember this song. It was nothing to do with Irish music, called "Lily the Pink." I don't know if you remember that one. She drinks, Lily the Pink, the Pink, the Pink. I don't know. Anyway, but it was a famous song from the '60s. But these kind of slightly, kind of raucous, shouty songs. You know what I mean? I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we moved to Ireland, I was 10, and I discovered I'd been into the Beatles and the Monkees, and I loved all that stuff. And I'd already thought, I'm going to make music, and that's what I want to do. And I discovered glam rock. But in the meantime, my dad, he used to take us for drives, and whenever we'd go on a drive, it was always this kind of country music, Irish country music, for want of a better word. It was a phenomena, and is a phenomena that exists. I don't know if you ever heard about this, but
no.
So there's a such thing as Irish country music that has existed for forever, and mostly there's a phenomenon in Ireland of, they call them show bands, where people do cover versions of famous songs. And people go to a dance, and you might have up to 2,000 people at these dances where you have people playing cover versions, basically. Like a wedding band thing.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of these country people, they stuck with the country style of music, so that's all they ever played, and they became very famous in Ireland, and even some of them went to Nashville, and they kind of had semi-international careers, being country artists. And I heard a lot of that kind of music as well, like a crazy amount, really. And also a lot of our traditional music, because when we moved from Ireland, or from America to Ireland, for about 2 years, our parents would drag us around the country, going to various places. They were kind of having a crash course in Ireland, because they left when they were teenagers. My mom went to England when she was a teenager, and my dad went to America. And they were kind of introducing themselves to Irish cultures and enjoying all that, rediscovery, or whatever you want to call it. So I got to see an awful lot of those classic Irish, whatever you want to call them, like traditional bands, like the Dubliners and the Clancy Brothers and all that kind of stuff. But I always remember it as being really raucous, and because I was a child, and I was kind of not introverted exactly, but I was into my music, and I love the Beatles, and I love glam rock, and I kind of hated, to be honest, all of that stuff. I did really quite enjoy the Irish traditional stuff, because it was so wild and banging, but I really didn't like the country stuff, at all. So in a way, it was like everything I was into was the opposite of what my parents were into, in a way, a way of looking at it. But my dad was a real. Sorry.
No, go ahead. You did.
No, he loves having sing-songs and singing. So I had seems like a whole lifetime of my dad basically singing songs and loads of people singing and, you know, all this kind of stuff. It was even backstage at my buddy Valentine gigs, he's managed to do it where he has the whole backstage singing along to something.
Amazing.
Yeah. But, yeah. But yeah, you know, but for me, I was very exposed to a lot of that, but I was kind of like very much into my own stuff, you know, which was what I was into, you know. But of course, it all sinks in, doesn't it? You know. So,
were the Pogues an important bridge for you between that punk?
No, not at all. Not at all. No, I mean, I think the Pogues were really good because they were good. That's why they were good, because Shane MacGowan's great and they were a really good band and they were all good musicians and whatever. And they all did what they did. You know, I mean, you know, they did some truly classic music, but that mentality, I guess, I'd rebelled against so much. You know, I felt like I'd extracted myself from that loud, rah, 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 you know, that kind of thing. I grown up with it, you know what I mean? I grown up with drunken men throwing me around the room and, you know, kind of all like, just, I mean, I grew up in, I've been to a lot of what you might call classic kind of Irish, rowdy, loud, sing-song musical experiences, you know what I mean? Like a lot, you know, because that's what my dad loved, you know. So, and for me, it was just like, where can I escape to, you know? How can I get away from this? Even though I did actually like all, you know, I did quite like the madness, you know. But, yeah, it was, yeah, like the Pogues for me reminded me a bit of all that, you know what I mean? So it wasn't particularly attractive, actually. But the music and, you know, everything and like what they were, you know, was actually transcended all that, I think, really.
My Bloody Valentine's music seems incredibly introspective in comparison with that kind of traditional music.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Even had a funny experience actually in Ireland where we were at somebody's house after we were in a pub, and then people were like, "Oh, come back to this house," and the person had a round table, and they had this tradition of when they have guests over, and there was about maybe 10, 15 people there, and they have this tradition of basically having a guitar and passing it around, and everyone sings a song, you know. And if you can't play guitar, you just sing a song. And they were all belting out these tunes, you know. And it's an Irish tradition of really kind of going for it, you know. It's real like blah. You really open your mouth and sing out loud, and it got to my wife Anna, who makes music, or you know, she writes songs and stuff, and she had the guts to basically do it, you know. But she sang this quite quiet song that she did, and the guest kind of stamped his hand on the table and said, "That's sing loud, sing out loud," you know what I mean? And then it went around a few more people, and it came to me, and I was like, "I'm not doing it." You know what I mean? I'm not doing this. I grew up with a whole lifetime of rowdy Irish men singing at the tops of their voices, and now I'm not, you know. I said I'm doing nothing, and he just went, how did you make a living? You know, you can't even sing at a get together, and I just made a weird noise, and it's like, that's how I made a living. And, you know, but I just, afterwards, Anna, my wife, was a bit upset, and she was like, well, that was really rude, you know, like basically, you know, stopping me in the middle of my song and saying, you know, sing out, don't be so introspective. And as ironic as she can, because she's Danish, and she would sing this traditional Danish songs like she's a sailor, you know. But but anyway, ironically, I was like saying to her, this is everything I hated about when I was in Ireland. You know what I mean? And growing up, everybody is like, you got to be like banging your hand on the table and going, la, 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 la. You know what I mean? Being all kind of rowdy or overly passionate. You know what I mean? Or else the ballad that's overly passionate and deep. You know what I mean? And I was, you know, it was like, I was like, I guess what I became is the antithesis of all that.
Yeah.
In some ways, without thinking about it.
How is My Bloody Valentine viewed?
But by the way,
Ireland?
just not particularly. You know, I think with us, we have this sort of phenomena, not phenomena, but you know, but I would say without exaggerating, the majority of people who would say buy a record of ours or something or come to our concerts are between sort of 15 and sort of, you know, 35, that kind of age group. So a lot of the people that would be into us here would be quite young people. And the like older people, the older generation don't even acknowledge us, in fact. We have a few real champions, like a DJ in Ireland called Dave Fanny, and he's always been very supportive of us. But the press wise, like it's like they do lists in Ireland all the time, and they kind of go the best Irish albums, and they purposely put U2 at something like 49, and we get to be number 27, you know, and then you've got like at the top 10 as all these new band, you know, or obscure bands, or you know, whatever, to be cool and controversial. And I'm just like, yeah, whatever. I don't really care. You know what I mean? It's like I live in the countryside over here, and I'm not really connected to the city. And it's like I didn't live in Ireland for 30 years of my life. You know, I was born in America. You know, went to Ireland at 10, at 20 when I left, and then I lived for 30 years in London, basically. So, in the past 5 years, I've kind of been here in the countryside, which I like. You know, I there's some seriously weird, interesting characters in the countryside. You know, real genuine people have been here for, you know, it goes back as far as you can imagine. You know, and they have their ways of speaking, and I really quite like that kind of stuff. You know. They're actually quite open-minded as well. They're all quite like they're used to. I think maybe also I think because they're so near, they're a few hours from a big city, but close enough to a big city that they feel they nearly purposely ignore it. You know, it's really weird. Like so many people I meet never go to Dublin that live around here. They've never been in their whole life.
Wow.
You know, it's interesting. It's like
that's insular.
Yeah, it's like. Yeah, very, very interesting. But I don't know. But before it sounds like I'm saying I'm hating on Irish music, I actually do like traditional Irish music. I do quite like that kind of stuff, you know. I really do. It's just the over loud banging the table type stuff. Definitely, I had more experience of that than most people will ever imagine. You know, they would have no idea what I've experienced. You know?
I love that image you painted of your father backstage, like raising everybody in song.
Yeah. Oh yeah, he's done that more than a few times.
Kevin Shields, when My Bloody Valentine started, for the first few EPs, you know, you had a different singer. In David Conway, and the first few releases for My Bloody Valentine, like looking back to that sort of lead up to Isn't Anything, you really were experimenting and with different sounds for the band, weren't you? Like, were you sort of conscious of that at the time, or?
Well, the odd thing was that we when we started with Dave in '83, we were actually based around a tape machine and a synthesizer, and the guitar was a very birthday party influence type guitar, and drums. But the music, otherwise, it was made with tape machines or tape machine. We had a Porta Studio, a Tascam, Porta Studio, and it's a synth, basically, a Yamaha CS5 synth, and that was our kind of beginning, and everything that we did was really just free form, experimenting with everything, really, and we used to put the guitars through the synth a lot, and then as we got more into garage music, and that kind of thing, and we kind of became this sort of more of a kind of garagey pop band, with a love of noise, basically. And the era between sort of like around 86 and 97 with Dave got very conceptual. It was like very big contrasts, but they weren't as very apparent on the records, but it was much more apparent live. But it was a conceptualness that was kind of fun, and we were playing with it. But then Dave left, and then when Belinda joined, we sort of initially scrambled a bit to find our way, and the first thing we dropped is that kind of part of that conceptual attitude, which then led to what we did in '88, which is more natural. But I guess, sorry.
No, go on.
No, I guess I'm saying we started off being what you might call very experimental, and to the point of kind of difficult to listen to, and having no songs, as to speak in the traditional sense, to becoming a virtual pop band, but then as we moved into the phase of '88, where we were perceived as more experimental, say, that was just us relaxing a bit more into who we really were, I guess.
Yes.
It was just being a bit more natural.
At what point did you feel like you found yourself, really, that you'd arrived at a sound that you were happy with?
It was in '88, really, actually, yeah. Everything just seemed to click, I don't know what happened, but Belinda joined the band. Things sort of changed. I smoked some pot, I smoked pot before, but I smoked it a bit more regularly, and that seemed to also focus me in some way. I wasn't a stoner and that were like smoking all day kind of thing or anything like that. I hardly ever smoked when I recorded or anything like that, but or mixed, never. But those things maybe were slightly a contributing factor, but I think it was a lot more to do with just relaxing, and not really caring, and not having a concept really, that was too limiting. So
I'm talking with Kevin Shields of My Bloody Valentine about the back catalogue of the band that's just been reissued. And Kevin, in '88, you put out the You Made Me Realise EP. That's one of the ones that's been reissued.
Yeah.
How much tinkering have you done with these early recordings?
No, not too much at all with that, actually. We're because we haven't got them on vinyl yet. So that's only going to be on CD, and they're pretty much what we had out before,
Yeah.
That the compilation CD that we have coming out is basically the same as the one that was out before, with a little surprise at the end.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. So if anybody, for any people that have it already, and they just need, and those completist type people who kind of go, I have to have it, I have to buy the other one because it has a different label on it, or something. So it will make it worth their while.
You Made Me Realise as a song is really special to you, isn't it? Because it's been in your sets live for a really long time.
Yeah, it's because it became something else live. So it just became, something. It was like a release, and just very enjoyable for us to play. And what it turned into from the original song was something that would be something up to 40 minutes long, and that was always very, very interesting for us. Always. because essentially what it was is that the song would start and then we'd have a middle bit, and that middle bit would be originally was 30 seconds, and then it turned to any amount of time. And the reason why it was any amount of time is because it depended on the audience reaction when we would go back to finish the song. So the audience became a feedback loop between the audience reaction and us, So we would be basically the audience would be a big part of what was happening. So it was always interesting because of that.
Kind of like a live experiment with each show with the audience because of the volume in which you were playing that song.
Yeah, and that created a kind of a very strong sensuous quality, and also a sense of sensory deprivation at the same time.
Yeah,
and essentially what would essentially happen to people would be that they would go in, their brainwave would sort of change to more of a theta brainwave state, which is a bit more between being awake and asleep or being in a trance or something. And that would give a sense of a sort of a kind of a slightly elated feeling for people. But the journey to that would be sometimes uncomfortable or even boring or absurd, or disturbing. But always at the end, that would be the end result. And the people that would experience that would be largely the people that were there, that stayed, because we have done gigs where more than a third of the people have left during that song. So, and it's absolutely normal to have at least 10% of the people to leave. Yeah.
Well, I've been there. I've experienced you playing that song a couple of times, and everything you're saying is absolutely true. From that feeling of I guess I felt panic at some stages because there were so many people around me, and I felt like it was completely overwhelming. The volume, the assault on the senses, and kind of panic around, is this actually going to really damage my hearing? But then also,
which is why we always make sure people get earplugs on the way in.
Yes, I had them in.
Oh, right. They should be all right then.
But also this feeling of like hearing instruments that actually weren't there because of the different frequencies, which I found really, really fascinating. Yeah,
and the more that people's brain waves would get more in sync, because funny enough, I'd read something recently about a scientific study where they found that the audience and the performers sync up, and all kind of they reach a collective similar brainwave state, and that's a two-way thing. The audience has to be there for this to happen, and so the audience wind up in a specific state of whatever their brain is in a certain frequency, and also the performer. And that's kind of what we were doing. We were reaching that point all the time. And when you do reach that state, of course, part of your inner self becomes part of the outer world much more obviously. The outer world is really inside anyway, you know what I mean? It's all inside, it's really in some level. And when it comes to perceiving things. So anyway, that would become more apparent, so people would be hearing all sorts of music, and it would be just very interesting for people.
Yeah. It seems like that idea of it seems like that interest of yours dovetails with, say, a group like of Sonic Youth, who, back in the late 80s, they were really interested and involved with experimental sound and interested in frequencies. And
actually, one of the best gigs I ever saw was Sonic Youth. They played a place called the Ulu in London. And there was probably only about 100 people there in a room that could hold 500 or something. But it was an incredible gig of dynamics. I'd never heard anything like it before. Going from the quietest things to this exploding into these hugely powerful parts. It left a huge imprint on me, actually.
Yes. Well, there was and you may have seen or heard of Glenn Branca, but in the early 90s, I saw one of his guitar orchestras. So
Oh,
Glenn
wow.
Branca being,
Yeah.
an experimental composer who would amass 20, 30 guitarists all to play the same note at volume as part of concerts. And I saw, Lee Ronaldo and Thurston Moore and members of the Swans as part of the lineup for one of his shows. And it was a similar thing, where just that sustained note at volume created incredible sounds and sensations within the room.
Yeah, they really worked overtones. Glenn Branca did, like,
that's right.
really quite pretty extensive level. And it's funny because Lee Ronaldo definitely was in Glenn Branca's band. I think even Thurston Moore was in briefly before they formed Sonic Youth.
Do you think, Kevin, that this idea of frequencies and hypnotic states that you've obviously played with live with that song, You Make Me Realize, has that fed back all the way through your take on My Bloody Valentine? Do you see that as part of the sort of essential DNA behind this interplay of texture and discordance and melody that's at the heart of your music?
Yeah, at some level. I mean, there's always been, in a way, everything we do is a little bit like when you see a clip on TV of the Beatles playing in 1964 with the audience screaming, and it's just this magical music with this crazy noise and people just seeming to do not very much with their hands and not really be that demonstrative in their, and it's just the most powerful thing in the world. That, I think that effect of maybe seeing that when I was young, sort of made everything I do have that quality where it's sort of at one level complete, like a kind of totalness of nearly everything happening at the same time, with at the heart of it just a nice song, but it's something that's transportive, that's not just those, I don't know, that's why I use the Beatles as an example, because they're, for me, the music always seemed to be, it's always greater than the sum of any part, and I think that, with their vocals and everything, it's like nobody even knew who was singing, half the time.
But it's interesting that you talk about the applause, or
we
that
actually used that. We on the record we made in '87. I shouldn't really say this because we can get sued, but I'm just like, sue us, it's like, sue us for all the money we made from it, but which is zero. But basically, in '87 we had a record called Ecstasy, a mini album, which got turned into Ecstasy and Wine album thing. But anyway, that song, or not that song, but a song called Claire is basically a kind of a sonic garagey band, birdsy Sonic Youth thing, essentially. And all the way through it is this screaming noise. You can hear this kind of noise, and that's the Beatles at Hollywood Bowl, the audience noise. So I even did it, in a song.
I don't think you can get sued for audience noise, can you?
I don't know. So that's why I never really said it too often publicly, because I think, well, you never know. But I'm just thinking, what the hell, if they're going to sue us, they can sue us. But
how,
in
Kevin?
Homage,
How did you arrive at? You talk about the Beatles and that incredible sense of melody, that discipline in songwriting. But there's a big leap between that and the sort of disruption of that within My Bloody Valentine's music, and the way that you have played with contrasts throughout the years, high and low, and discordance and melody.
Yeah,
like you seem to be someone who's very interested in oppositional elements in music.
I guess so. I think maybe it's my personality. I don't really know, but I do feel a need to create balance, and balance sometimes feels like it's all things, not just one thing, as in, but but because I don't really perceive things as that discordant, you know, as in other people do more than I do. To me, it's just another part of melody, but it's just a bit more. Yeah, it's not. It's challenging, you know, but it's not. It doesn't still feel discordant. It feels more like the effects if you play, for example, certain kind of jazz chords. But if you play them distorted, the harmonics will be a lot more. They'll fight with each other more, you know, and that fighting thing when you have certain very close notes in certain things creates a sort of an interesting energy, you know, that I think I'm pretty attracted to.
Yeah. So say a song like Lose My Breath on Isn't Anything, which I find, you know, to be a really sort of fascinating song in the way that it moves in its chord changes, you know, between, I guess it's major and minor. And
I have no clue.
Say what?
I have no clue what it is. I mean, I did it, but it was in a guitar. I just made, it's from a tuning. So I just made some guitar tuning and then made this, you know, made up the tune. But I didn't. I don't know what it is. You know.
It must make it hard to play it again.
Actually, that's actually true. In the sense that every time we have to go on tour, I always have to literally go, how the hell did that go? You know, I have no idea. You know, I just remember unfortunately, I remember things visually, but they're not visually like where my hand was on the guitar. You know, it's just some more abstract visual memory. So, but luckily enough, obviously we always have the guitar tunings written down. So it's always the same process of me literally kind of tuning the guitar into the tuning and going, okay, what the hell would I have done? You know, and that was it, you know, and I kind of rework it and re-remember it each time.
Yeah.
Happens. And somehow I keep on forgetting, which is really weird. You know, it's just like, I think every time we've done a tour, I've had to sit down and go, okay, how did that go again? You know?
Yeah. It's hard to keep track of that stuff. I guess you need different guitars for different songs.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes it pretty easy, you know, being able to do that. So that's pretty much what happens.
Yeah. I remember when Sonic Youth toured Australia, they almost had a separate aeroplane for all their different guitars.
Yeah, yeah. I remember we played with Sonic Youth in '87, and they arrived and they did their thing where they have these big flat cases, and they take all the guitars out of the cases and then put them each like on each side of the stage is a kind of turned upside down flat case with about, you know, 20 guitars in it.
Yeah.
And we were just really incredulous at the time. We were like, how could they need so many guitars? You know, how is it necessary? You know, we didn't have a clue, you know. I was a fan of Sonic Youth, but I just had no idea that they would have so many guitars. Yeah. And then, ironically, Thurston Moore was backstage at one of our gigs, and he goes, "Oh, this reminds me of Sonic Youth gig." You know, because you could see all our guitars lined up everywhere.
Yeah. On that song, Lose My Breath, we were talking about Belinda. You know, I wanted to ask you about Belinda's vocals because she's moving around too with the melodies that she's singing, and you hear that a lot in your songs. But how did that kind of work? Like, I always felt a bit like My Bloody Valentine's melodies might have come from humming rather than actually sort of writing a song on an acoustic guitar or any sort of traditional way. How did that happen?
No, they actually do come from just sitting there with a guitar and usually playing one or two chords and then going and liking the way that they follow each other, which then provokes the need to find something else. And it's not really chord driven so much as just driven by the need to do the next thing. So I want a vocal melody to go somewhere, so I'll try and find a chord to work with that. But I won't even have the note of the melody. I'll just be searching for both at the same time. Because most of the songs that we have, I largely kind of make up the vocal melody when I make up the music, you know. So that's kind of how it's done. You know? Yeah. It just sort of it comes kind of at the same time.
So on an album like Isn't Anything, were you working? I know that album was recorded really fast.
Yeah,
compared
pretty
with
fast. Yeah,
Loveless, like
yeah.
was it a couple of weeks? So
No, it wasn't that fast, but I think we actually it was great really. But we had at least a month, but maybe 6 weeks. We were in a residential studio in Wales,
uh-huh.
and we had a really interesting engineer. He was a guy who used to be in what they call kraut rock bands. You know, he was part of the whole German scene. He was in a band called Ameldul too,
Yeah.
and he knew all the other bands like Can and the guys that became Kraftwerk and just all that scene intimately, really. You know, because he was there. He'd moved over there as a teenager, and he was an English guy, but it's called Dave Anderson. Anyway, so we had a guy who was basically very into the aesthetic of messing around really and experimenting, and because we had 6 weeks was an insanely long time for us at the time, because we're used to going in and doing things usually in under a week. You know, if we were making some, you know, if we did 5 tracks, we'd do in 5 days. And 6 weeks felt like a big luxury, really, you know. But what happened was after we did all that 6 weeks, I had a strong feeling that it wasn't. I didn't really feel the album was there still, and so they gave us another 11 days in a very cheap basement studio somewhere, and we did pretty much half of Isn't Anything in that 11 days period.
And how clearly did you feel at that stage that you understood like the way you wanted to make My Bloody Valentine sound in the studio? Like how much of that was experimentation in studio at that stage?
Well, it all
and
was.
Happy accidents.
Yeah, it was. It was like a big experiment, and lots of happy accidents, and lots of like anything goes kind of attitude. Without, at the same time, we were also being very conscious and aware that we were just a kind of quite a, you know, we were kind of like a garage band, or you know, or like we lived in squats, and we, as I said, we had minimal equipment, even as a philosophy. We had quite small amplifiers, and everything had to fit into a van and us as well, kind of thing. And there was no room for Marshall stacks or anything like that. And so I guess what I'm saying is everything we did, like when we did the Made Realize EP, that was basically, you know, that was a representation of us having the opportunity to make music for 5 days. And some of us was written that in that period. And, you know, as I said, when we had 6 weeks of time, that felt like a huge amount of time to mess around. But we were always, at the same time, not thinking we can just do anything, so much as we're still a band who want to play this stuff live. And we want it to be as easy as possible to play live. So it was done also with that kind of, it was done quite rough and basic on purpose, especially as in anything. We kept the vocals as raw as possible. We didn't even put compression on them hardly, and we wouldn't do comping unless it was a disaster, like Soft as Snow had to be comped, but you know, it sounds like it, you know, but everything else was basically the vocal from beginning to end. We just go, that take is good, and allowing it to feel very performance like. And as it turned out, all those songs that we did do on it Isn't Anything were very, very easy to play live. It was just very natural. It just felt very easy and natural. But yeah, so it was sort of a balance between feeling like we can do anything, and we did try all sorts of things, and just making stuff that was very easy to do, you know.
When You Wake, You're Still in a Dream, you know, such a fantastic song from Isn't Anything, with Belinda, you know, providing the harmonies and you're on vocals, and there's this kind of magical interplay between the two of you. I must tell us a little bit about that song as it sat sort of live for you, because, you know, well, it feels like that song is particularly suited to the live environment.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was, again, one of those things we just virtually bashed out, you know. But um, I don't know. I mean, it was
Yeah.
just one of those. It was relatively easy to play, and um, it was a bit like, you know, I don't know. It was just
Yeah.
like, it was like something like Fever Your Kiss. It was just very easy to play live, you know. But
You said earlier, Kevin, that when Belinda joined, things really changed for the band.
mhm. Yeah,
And you began singing as well. How did you
yeah,
feel about starting to sing for the group? Were you reluctant?
yeah. I mean, it only happened because we initially got we decided we wanted a female singer and a male singer, and well, first of all, we just thought we'd get a singer. That's all we thought. We'll get a singer, and what happened was there was this guy that we thought might be quite good, and then Belinda came along, and we were like, we definitely want Belinda, so we thought we'll have a male and female singer, and we rehearsed like that for a short while. We even did one gig or two gigs like that with this guy, and but then he didn't work out, and we had a gig booked for, it was like a week, and it was a gig coming, and he didn't work out because he wouldn't do the rehearsals for the gig, and we're like, you know what, forget about it, and then I was like, okay, shit, I'm going to have to sing, and that was it really. I just sort of had to. It wasn't a plan. I just kind of had to do it. Yeah. But because I'd always made up the vocal melodies, and so I was used to kind of singing them to people, or when I'd make up a tune or a song, I kind of go, this is how it goes, basically, and then Dave would write his lyrics, and it would change, it changes them, and people take it on themselves, and the same with Belinda, but I was used to doing that, sort of singing, yeah. But I wasn't I had no idea about being a performer or singing for people, in front of me. That was, except for the band, even the band, I didn't like doing it, I would hate if they looked at me. But I said, don't look at me. But yeah, so suddenly I'm a singer, but thank God for Belinda, that's all I can say.
Well, it does take the focus off just the one person, doesn't it?
Yeah,
but,
yeah. And it also opened things up, and allowed us to do types of songs that we never would have done if I was the only person singing, or if we, I'd always loved the idea of the male-female thing in bands, but when Belinda joined, it became kind of impossible to imagine that we could be any other way, It was just like, yeah, it was just the way it had to be. It was great, really.
Yeah, perfect, really. I mean, one of those things where you don't realize it's missing until you discover it.
Yeah, totally. I know, as I was saying, Belinda also brought a lot of good taste into the band. She had a lot of the bands that she was into, and, her aesthetic was quite, like, she brought Dinosaur Jr. She was like, listen to this, and I was like, oh, wow, just never heard of them before. And it was like an injection, of kind of something that was quite good.
Who were your favorite bands that were male female that you loved to listen to?
Well, there was obviously, so many, but because from whenever, you'd have, like in the 60s, obviously you had all the groups where you had male and female, mixed, female singers. I love so many female singers, like from Jefferson Airplane to Dusty Springfield, and love the Mamas and Papas and all that kind of stuff. And when I was a little kid, the big show on TV was the Partridge Family, and the whole family basically were a band, so it was, and they were all singing. Even though David Cassidy was the lead singer, it would have been totally uninteresting without Susan Day, so.
Oh yeah, she was quite the sex symbol, wasn't she? In the Partridge
totally,
Family?
Yeah. But also the sound, because the mom also sang, like the sound of the Partridge Family was a male-female mix. It wasn't really David Cassidy. It was without the female backing vocals and all that. It wasn't them. So, but then obviously with all the punk bands, with Slits and Susie and the Banshees, and I love this band called the Modettes. They were a band around, and Kleenex. There's a band called Kleenex that I used to really like. And I just found that so many of the bands that I liked had women in them, basically, and like the Velvet Underground, for even, it was like it was part of that thing where, it's it was just always there, as something important.
I'm glad you mentioned the Velvet Underground because, the way that they worked with Nico is sort of endlessly fascinating.
Yeah,
really.
I also had Mo Tucker in the band,
brought.
as a musician. She was just there as a musician, as opposed to like the Nico role, And I quite like that about them. That it was such an important part of their sound, the way she played drums.
Yeah.
But sorry, what were you saying?
No, I guess I've always felt that Papson isn't anything that that there was a distinct, Velvet Underground Nico sort of stream running at the base of it, but I've never been entirely sure how much of an overt influence, say, that was on you.
I mean, definitely an influence. Yeah, I mean, like a lot of things, but they were definitely one of them for sure. I'm particularly, what I loved about Velvet Underground was the model of a band who can do music that can be really quite heavy, basically, and stuff that's really gentle. They had that really huge scope, with their music. They could do pretty much anything.
Are there any particular songs that you've written that you feel like reflect the influence of the Velvet Underground?
I mean, I could pick one. Like, there's a song called "I Need No Trust," and if you heard that and think of the Velvet Underground and listen to that, you would kind of go, "Oh yeah, totally," But then it's other things as well, like Lee Hazelwood, but probably loads, but not consciously.
Lee Hazelwood and Nancy Sinatra,
yeah.
Like in terms of the male-female thing.
Yeah. Oh, that was a big thing as well.
Yeah.
That was something that was quite, again, you can hear it in loads of our stuff, that kind of thing. And I did go through a big Lee Hazelwood phase. And funny enough, it was caused by seeing a band Einstürzen und Neubauten. And they were in a particular, it was in 84 or early 85, I can't remember what it was, but it was in Berlin when we lived there. And we were only there for 4 months, so it was sometime like that time, and they did the set called Love Songs, and it was them doing cover versions, but in being Einstürzen und Neubauten, and they were being extremely explosive and incredibly weird, bizarre noises and stuff. But they did a song called "Sand" by Lee Hazelwood.
That's a great song. Hazelwood.
Yeah. And I'd never heard it at that point. I wasn't that conscious of Lee Hazelwood at that point. And it was like, what the hell is this? Like, it's one of the best songs I've ever heard in my life. And it's made by people literally throwing Molotov cocktails, sort of explosions on fire and everything. And it wasn't theater. It was really quite dangerous. Like, people were getting singed hair. And, it was just really affecting, and it's funny enough, the Jesus and Mary Chain had very similar influences, and that's probably why I clicked so quickly with the Jesus and Mary Chain, because it was like, wow, everything you're doing is some stuff I really love, but done in a brilliant way,
Are you talking about? Sorry, I'll just ask you something. I'll come back to the Jesus and Mary Chain, but did you ever hear Roland Howard's version of Some Velvet Morning with Lydia Lunch?
Extremely. I heard it thousands of times because that was one of my favorite records. Yeah. And that was a big influence on us, actually. And we actually did a cover of that based on their version. But we never really managed to do it live, but we used to do it all the time in practice. And then when Belinda joined the band, we did a song called Never Say Goodbye, which was very much of that style, with a guy and a woman, a female, and answering back to each other kind of thing a little bit. But that version was brilliant. Yeah.
I'm talking with Kevin Shields from My Bloody Valentine on Double J about all the reissues that are coming out, and also all the whole back catalogue, which is being made available digitally for the very first time. Kevin, at around the time that My Bloody Valentine were coming up in the late 80s in the UK, tell us a little bit about the sort of parallel path of the Jesus and Mary chain, and, you know, the English bands that you felt that, well, they were obviously Scottish, but the bands that you felt that you had an affinity with at that time, because the Jesus and Mary chain and My Bloody Valentine seem to have very similar interests musically.
Well, I mean, when we left Ireland, we had no awareness of the Jesus and Mary chain, and funnily enough, how we looked and dressed was reasonably similar to what they looked like, except we were going, pretty much. And what the common thread was funny enough, going back to the birthday party. They had a way of looking, you know, that was kind of influential. There was other bands around, but it was sort of a kind of look that we recognized immediately as like, oh, they look like us, you know. And musically, funny enough, when we did the song "Don't Cramp My Style," it has about five tracks of feedback over it, but it's kind of Roland Howard style feedback, which was, you know, not like Velvet Underground screechy high end feedback, but more this kind of howling mid range thing. And I was thinking, this feedback idea is really cool, putting loads of tracks of feedback over a song. And we did that in '84 before I even heard the Jesus. I hadn't heard anything of them at this point. And I saw the thing with Answers to Know About, and again, just before I heard the Jesus and Mary chain. And when I heard them, my sense is that they were doing what I would like, what I thought was pretty cool, but in a much better way. You know, I was like, these guys are significantly ahead, you know, and I felt like that for quite a couple of years, you know, like when Psycho Candy came out, you know, I was fascinated by it, really fascinated. I would actually play it to my aunts and uncles and people who had not much interest in music, and I would say, listen to this. What do you hear? Like, what do you think when you hear this? Because I thought it was so radical that I really wanted to, with all the feedback, you know, I would just wanted to see how people would react to it. I was an evangelist for it.
They might have thought you're being a bit precocious playing that first Jesus and Mary chain album. It's not for everybody.
Yeah, but it was just. I thought it was really a truly great record.
It is. It's a game changer.
Yeah, totally. And you know, we basically, you know, in our kind of typical musician kind of way of seeing things, felt like, well, we can't do feedback, you know, like that. But I really love noise, because I was actually into this band called the Gun Club, and this guy called Kid Congo Powers, who played in the Gun Club, and also played with the Cramps, and he had a particularly raw sound. He used a Fender Twin, and he had it really bright, and when his fuzz sound, it was just like this kind of white noise fuzz sound, and that had been a thing that we'd been particularly into. So we just felt we can adopt the white noise fuzz element of things, you know, but stay away from the feedback pretty much. We'll be fine. But of course, we got a great review from the Jesus and Mary chain at one point saying, "Oh, My Bloody Valentine, they're like Freddie and the Dreamers with noise," you know. And I thought it was pretty funny. But you know, they didn't really like us very much. But it was partly funny enough. It was partly caused by an interview that have you heard of Joe Foster?
Joe Foster?
He was a guy who was with Creation Records when the Jesus and Mary chain made their first record, the first single, and he kind of claimed credit for the whole feedback thing. He said it was his idea, and they kind of fell out, and the Jesus and Mary chain went on to make Psycho Candy by themselves without any influence of anybody around them. And but Joe was always on the periphery, going, "I invented feedback," and we wound up signing to his label for a brief period for the record, the new record by My Bloody Valentine. Yeah, mouthful. But
sorry, are you talking about you signing to Creation? Is that what you're referring to?
No. Before we signed to Creation, in 1986, we were on a label called Kaleidoscope Sound, and that was Joe Foster's label.
Okay.
And he kind of still had a kind of thing, about the Mary Chain wanting, they were kind of having a kind of constant bickering kind of thing going on about the feedback or whatever. And anyway, we were on Joe's label. We did an interview, and the person who did the interview was actually his partner. And they put into the interview a quote that said, "We didn't want to do things like the corny way, like the Jesus and Mary Chain," which we never said. It was just like taking the piss out of them, but putting it into our Dave's mouth as if he said it. And they read that because it was at the end of the interview, and they said that I've become good friends with Douglas Hart, and he said that he remembers they were reading that and going, "This seems kind of cool," and then reading the end part and going, "Wankers," or I'm not absolutely, they must be, but we hate them immediately. So, and then ironically, when we lived in our main squat, Jim Reed lived down the road, and we had shared the same tube station, so we quite often would pass him on the street, and he would very studiously ignore us, even though we were massive fans, but
yeah.
But they would just look down on us as these horrible, horrible wannabes,
I hope you've made up with the Reed brothers since then.
No, when we made the Made Me Realize EP, they became instantly kind of into us. At that point, they kind of liked it. And William even put his song "Thorn" on a mixtape before they played live. So
beautiful.
Yeah, and then we wound up playing with them on the roller coaster tour.
Yeah, awesome.
And that was really cool.
I spoke with when they were in Australia last. I chatted with both of them, and it was so great to meet and just go deep into their music, because Psycho Candy was a bit of a life-changing album for me when it came out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was for a lot of people, I think.
Yeah. And I still go back to it time and time again, and I'm still amazed by the sound that they've got on that album.
No, it's truly brilliant.
Kevin, you were talking about feedback with Jesus and Mary Chain. How hard has it been for you to harness, that bucking horse of feedback and find ways that you can bend it to your own means? Can you tell us a little bit about how you've sort of utilized that to effect in My Bloody Valentine generally, I guess?
Well, it's just because you can make it sound like anything, so when we got into sampling, it became a big thing of really experimenting with making lots of kind of feedback and sampling it, and instead of having a normal note, it has the kind of movement of the feedback, and that was a big thing. But funnily enough, like when we play live, there isn't so much feedback in the way you might think of the word. It's more sounds absolutely at their total limit. So there is a sense of things doing that, but not really so much. But as a tool to create things in the studio, it became like a main tool. That I couldn't really think of for a long time of doing anything with a sample that didn't involve some guitar feedback that was basically turned into something that sounded more like a flute or something a bit more, whatever. It just would give things a quality that was became kind of essential, really.
And that's one of the things with that I've found listening to Isn't Anything and Loveless and also MBV. There's this amorphous quality in your sound, and I guess particularly on Loveless, where it's so intensely layered that it's almost impossible at times to know what instrument is playing what.
It's funny. Well, I give you a quick an idea of how things are, that might spoil an illusion a little bit, but also give an insight into it as well. A song like Tyr Knows When, which sounds incredibly dense, and loveless, that's essentially one guitar track, one mono guitar track that I recorded, just through this reverse reverb effect, and it was quite clean. And then I just bounced that, or I recorded that then through an amplifier, which gave it its kind of heavy sound. And so it's still one guitar track, but then copied, but it's still one thing, as opposed to two different things played, or it's just the sound is treated essentially. And that makes up, 80% of what you hear in that song. And in the mixing, I would then take those two basic tracks, and mainly the distorted one, and then multiply them maybe 5 or 7 times, and have different kinds of compression, triggering the compression from other instruments and things to create different movement, which then creates this effect of a lot of things happening. But in the end, it was this one mono guitar track just copied and treated different ways. And then the other part of it is our big feedback experiment thing, where we had all these feedback samples that we created a kind of sequence melody type thing, which sounds like the bubbly kind of melody part that people hear in it. And then we had a mono sample of it was from a record that was said it was called Disaster in the Distance, a rumbling sound. And then we had 2 tracks of this drum experiment, what we did with toms, programming toms, creating these kind of interesting rhythms that kind of merged in with the rumbling sound. So the rumbling and the rhythms were kind of merged in together. And then there's the basic drum track, and then there's a vocal on top, which was just a very simple couple double track type vocal thing, and then a tambourine. But that's everything.
That doesn't sound simple at all.
Really? Oh. But to me, it sounds really simple. But I guess another way of saying it, I could have said it in a really quick way of saying what you're hearing. 80% of what you're hearing is one guitar track. It's another way of saying it.
I guess the mythology.
People perceive it as many things. Many guitar tracks. They would imagine 20 guitar tracks or something.
But isn't it the same thing? Like if you're layering one sound over and over again.
It's different when you, for example, if you play something twice and you put it into the same space in the same stereo, in the stereo field, if you put something twice in the same space, it starts to, in some way, take away from itself a little bit. It can be really good, but it's like it has to complement itself at some level. When you do things twice and have them in stereo, they complement themselves very well because the differences work very well with the stereo. When you do things 4 times and they're the same, but you're playing them 4 different times, the variance in your playing starts to create a kind of a mush, for want of a better word, and so a lot of what you call the great guitar sounds that most people hear are actually, generally speaking, usually made up of no more than a couple of tracks at a time. For that reason, that once you get past 2 or 3, you really start to move into an area where it starts to actually get less effective. So the effect and especially because I use a tremolo arm, which really opens up the sound quite a lot, and the sort of frequency range of it. The more I do, the less good it sounds, basically.
Right.
So it only allows really, like a song like Soon is one guitar track. It's the one guitar track that's clean, and then I kick in the other amp, which is distorted. But it's one track, I only said it's one main guitar track. It sounds like 2, but it's really 1, and between the distorted and the clean sound, they have a different timing, even because of the way they're so distorted. You know, it changes the timing, so people perceive it as two things happening. But a lot of the music is like that. You know, like Only Shallow is just 2 tracks in stereo that are different sounds, and a bass track which is over 2 tracks, and then the overdub part, which is the beginning part, and the bit that's not the singing, the bit that goes round, whatever. That part is again a couple of tracks played and then sampled, and then played on top of itself, and then playing the sample an octave higher, and that's pretty much the song, you know. So I guess what I mean is they're the simpleness of them is a big part of why they sound kind of big.
Kevin, we were talking earlier about cassettes, and I had Loveless on cassette, which got baked in the car, which made it an especially interesting listen because there was that sort of warping of sound that you played with anyway in My Bloody Valentine, but I could never quite figure out what was on the album and what was as a result of the cassette tape getting completely baked.
That would be interesting. If you ever find it, put it online sometimes. That would be interesting. YouTube edition. Loveless Warped. Yeah.
I'd like you to explain a little about how you achieved that warping sound using your sort of glide guitar technique, and because that's so at the core of the interest of the band.
I mean, we kind of made up that name as a joke. You know, it was when we were putting track sheets in '88, and we were having to make up names for everything, and that became like the glide guitar became a name, and then I just sort of took it up as a sort of half serious thing, you know, because there is a relationship between how a glider, you know, works in the sky and the way I perceived. For me, when I use a tremolo arm, it's not just bending it in and out of tune so much as working with the frequencies and also the energy of it. So it kind of has the Doppler effect a bit, you know, where the pitch and the energy kind of are related. So it feels expressive, and sonically it feels better. It feels more open to me, and expressively it just feels easier, and just makes it feel more right, you know.
Have you got better at it over the years?
No, I'm not really. It's funny enough because it came very intuitively, and I think because I spent such a long time being quite simple in my way of playing, I really focused on kind of rhythm and this basic chord kind of way of playing. When I started using the tremolo arm, it just sort of all merged together very easily, and suddenly I could express things that people would normally do with lead guitar style techniques with the tremolo arm on the guitar. And I guess because it was more of an extension of a feeling than a conscious sense of the way I set I set the guitar up in such a way that it became very invisible. And the way I have it in my hand is just it's really in my palm, but I'm not holding it. It's just under my, you know, it's not something I hold in my hand. It's just something that's under my palm. So it just meant that I didn't think about what I do. I just do it, and that's the way I've kept it. You know, I just don't think about it, and I think that's about. I can't. What I can't do, which is really strange, is sit there on the couch and pick up a guitar and play like that, and do it with any. It just sounds like anybody else doing a sort of joke version of what I do. You know, it's purely works when it's when I'm playing the music, you know, and particularly when I'm playing with drums or rhythm, you know, or something, or I'm playing off something slightly. It just all makes sense, and it just again, it's just natural, you know. Yeah, it's just something like that.
Kevin, when the Glider EP came out after Isn't Anything and Soon was on it, I remember that moment well because it was like a bolt from the blue. It felt like that song felt so different to what you had done before.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'd never really at that point, or maybe I'll put it this way. Can you talk a little bit about the intersection of what was happening in electronic music in the UK at the time in Acid House and how you related to that within My Bloody Valentine, which seems sort of to be at the core of what happened with Soon?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, we in '88 we did a thing called Instrumental 2, which was we sampled Public Enemy track and I put some guitar over it, and it was just like just an idea thing that we did, and it was on a free 7-inch single, and now it's available on the EP's compilation thing. But so it was easy to get. But the point is that was just like one of the things that we did, like even a song like "Soft as Snow," and a lot of things we were doing at that time. We were basically showing that we were pretty influenced by hip hop, basically, and Public Enemy were one of the biggest kind of influences at that point in time. So a lot of what we did was alluding to that as we were moving along, and ironically, a track that we did in January of '89 was like a precursor to Soon. And again, it was more hip hop was the kind of thing that was really kind of driving us more than house music or anything. But in '89, we kind of got more exposed to clubs and stuff like that, and got to experience that culture quite a bit. And by the time we recorded Soon, there was an energy to it, you know, it was a different energy that was necessarily from hip hop. It was a little more frantic, and that was a little bit more coming from the experiences of hearing stuff in some clubs. But still hip hop, I would say, would be the thing that was driving us along in that direction, you know. There's a track that we did in '89 that was, as I said, it's sort of a precursor to that, which, you know, it sounds very much like these guys have listened to some hip hop music and they're trying to do something. And but we didn't release. That'll be out soon. Actually, that'll be available in some form. You know.
Have you ever tried to rap, Kevin?
No, I haven't. The nearest thing is songs like "Soft as Snow" and "Slow." You know, that would be the nearest thing to me rapping that I'll ever get. Yeah, it was funny at that time. There was a couple of bands doing, like a band called Popularly Itself were kind of getting into rap, and there was a few, because obviously the Beastie Boys did their thing, and which I really liked and all that stuff. But I really liked the Beastie Boys after Paul's Boutique onwards. You know, that was the Beastie Boys I really loved. But anyway, the point was there was quite a few bands kind of doing that kind of thing, and it seemed so kind of corny to me.
Yeah.
You know, and they weren't rappers, you know, and there was also this horrible phenomenon where people were putting, well, not horrible, but I didn't like it so much, when people were putting raps onto songs. You know, you just have records that were these dance type records with indie dance bands, but then they'd have a rap part, you know, then they'd have some rapper that they would bring in. And I loved hip hop, you know, and I loved that music, you know, but I associated rapping with good. I always would be fascinated by the fact that when people would do bad rapping, they nearly always had the same kind of rhythm and flow, and all the people that were actually doing rapping had these super complicated, totally different, new original ways of doing things, but people weren't hearing it. All they were hearing is da 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 da. You know what I mean? That's all they would hear. And yeah, I always found that really fascinating. You know, that people that weren't really rappers, when they rap, really don't have a clue what's happening at all. You know,
it sounds like you were listening, say with respect to Public Enemy. It sounds like you were listening, or you were tuned into the production, that kind of Bomb Squad production,
very much,
rather than the Chuck D's and Flavor Flav's vocals in a
well,
sense.
I love the vocals, but it was the sound of it as much as what they were saying. You know, I love the fact that what they were saying was really interesting, but it was the whole sound of it to me was, that's what really got me, you know, super excited. Was just that to me it was a super modern form of music, you know, and it was exciting in the same way as all the post-punk bands were exciting to me. You know, it had that same, like, wow, this is really now. This is not trying to be deferring to the past and being good because it's like something. It's good because it's it. You know, it's its own thing completely. You know, but with tons of influences. You know, it's like rap music is just so many cool records sort of merged into some songs. But then Public Enemy particularly had so many strange things that they would use for hook lines. You know, these kind of whistling, slightly Middle Eastern type things, and guitar feedbacky type things, and strange. You know, it was kind of it was definitely a huge thing for me.
Yeah, it became very sort of textural, didn't it? And I can see where that dovetails with My Bloody Valentine's interests there.
And also with the guitar, I found it, to me, it was I found it so strange that we had this thing called the indie music scene, or the independent music scene. Even the word alternative wasn't even used back then. And all these people were walking around thinking that they were somehow an alternative to something when there was these songs in the charts. You know, these hip hop tracks were coming, you know, getting popular, that were doing things musically that were so, you know, it wasn't futuristic. It was just super modern, you know. It was just really, it wasn't trying to be futuristic in a kind of synthy kind of way, you know, that kind of futurism concept. It was just purely, it couldn't have existed at any time but the time it existed, you know, and it was brand new, basically. And I just thought it was boring that bands were making these records that were sort of, you know, it was all, but it was like, the guitar is the guitar, you know, and I got very, very into the idea of the guitar being anything, you know, can make any kind of sound, you know.
How much did, you know, sampling change your approach to My Bloody Valentine then, around the time of Loveless?
Funny enough, we've been using samples since '87. In the studio, we frequently use them for noise effects and very, like I said, the Beatles thing. But how we would do it in those days, you had delay lines that would allow you to create essentially a sample that you could trigger. And all during Is It Anything, we use samples for various things. It's sort of peppered all over the album. But not people just think it's guitar. You know, they presume it's guitar. Somehow we did it with guitar pedals or something, but it would usually be the sampler that would be creating a lot of these effects. And then by Loveless, it was like just an important instrument for everything that we did, you know. But again, it would be more, if I wanted to do something with a keyboard, I would just think, well, I'm going to use a sampler, you know, because I'm going to make the sound from the sampler, and then I'll play it on a keyboard, you know, or trigger it, you know. Like a song like Soon that's got Belinda, there's a part where Belinda's doing a vocal thing during the whole tail out of the song. It was a type thing, and you know, she just did that once, and I basically played it on the sampler, you know, through the song. But that, you know, it was just like something we used all the time. But it was, but we weren't. I guess what we weren't trying to do is use it in a way that was so obvious. That was clearly like, oh, we're using samples. You know, like a song like Glider, which is an instrumental song. that's all sample, all made from guitar samples, except there's a backing kind of guitar part, bass and guitar with a kind of sense of rhythm, and then all that music on top is just feedback samples, played, on the sampler. We didn't even use a keyboard. We just triggered them all on the actual sampler. We hadn't worked out about the keyboard bit yet. We decided we got our new Akai sampler, and we were, sampling all this guitar feedback and then putting it in, chopping it up and going, okay, let's play that here. And we just played it onto tape. So the whole thing was played on tape without a computer or anything. But yeah, it was like an instrument. It was a new instrument that was great. That it allowed us to merge in the human voice quality and the guitar quality into all things that we would do with a keyboard or, anything.
Mm. How did things change for you when you released Soon? How did it feel in the UK?
I don't know. I mean, because we basically we finished it, I think, in February. We'd started Loveless in September of '89. We finished Soon, the EP, in February or March, I think. And then we went on a tour, a short tour. We were out there for about a month, doing some gigs. And then we just went back into the studio, pretty much. So yeah, it was good. It was good. It was good. The reaction was really good. I don't know. I really don't know. I guess because I guess what I mean is because we were just in the studio the whole time, right. And then we popped out for a month, and then we were back in the studio again. And we weren't that popular, really, like in the sense of like, it wasn't like we were playing to tens of thousands of people or anything. It was like we just did a tour, to whoever, like it was quite I can't remember. I just remember it being really short, and I can't remember it very well.
You were buried in the studio trying to finish Loveless, and everyone was dancing to Soon in indie clubs, particularly the Andy Weatherall mix, which was huge.
Yeah, that was great because we had discovered Andy Weatherall through a club called Shoom, and his whole thing was sort of playing at the end of it was mostly house music kind of thing, basically. And at the end of the night, he would kind of take over and kind of turn the whole thing into all sorts of crazy music type thing. And but as a sort of general direction, he kind of had this more lopey, mid-range, mid-tempo type thing going on, that was what we recognized very much from hip hop. And but he was really doing it in more in the dance kind of world, for that kind of audience. But with all sorts of music, he was doing also. It was quite eclectic. But anyway, he knew this guy, and then he did the Primal Scream thing, and he did a remix for Primal Scream, and he was like, oh, he's doing mixes, and because we already thought he was pretty cool from what he was doing as a DJ. So I think we became the third band he ever did a mix for. That was a Soon thing. That was his third time in the studio. And as part of the kind of deal, we kind of said, can we be there as part of it, like to see how he's going to do it. Because we were fascinated by the whole thing. And he was like, sure. And he kind of let us be there for maybe half of it we were there for. And cool. So we actually saw it happen, as he did it in the studio. So that was really great. And so
it's such an amazing mix. It's so amazing.
Yeah, I mean, the best part for us was that because we were, we'd got into that kind of club culture, and we weren't really part of it, but it was really cool to have that track kind of be part of everything, and it was for a short while, it was in everywhere for a little while, and it was, and it was quite funny for me because the kind of main hook part, and with the key, which is basically like a fluty kind of thing, where it goes da 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 da, that part, but that came from, obviously it's Soon, and it's a remix, so it is actually, it's all the same parts, obviously. But I don't. I'd basically been in the studio. We'd finished this EP that was going to be the Glider EP, and I wasn't 100% happy with Soon. We hadn't mixed it yet, and all the equipment was taken away, and the next session was coming in, and I'd been up all night, and it was 11:30, and the next band were coming in at 12 o'clock, and I suddenly got the idea for that part, and I begged them to sort of please let me put the tape back on and set an amplifier up, and I got a sound, and it happened to be a flute sound on this module, and I distorted it through an amplifier, and I played it once, and I just got the idea down, and that was it. That became the part. That the first time I ever played it, and then it was amazing seeing people dancing to that, because there's a part in the Andrew Otherall remix where it breaks down to pretty much just that part, and like seeing hundreds of people dancing to my quickly recorded idea that was recorded very fast, and I was given exactly 10 minutes to have it all done. And just, I got one take, one pass, and that was that,
Happy
it was
accidents.
kind of cool. Yeah. But it was so cool to see people dancing to it, because it was like, it just had this kind of feeling, because I'd been up for 24 hours at that point when I did it. It was the 11:30 in the morning, and I've been in the studio since 24 hours before that, and it kind of had that. Every time I ever saw it, it was always in some environment where everyone was completely out of their minds and been up all night, and it was like, this sort of has a life,
Yeah.
But
It's
Andy
30
Weatherall made
years.
that possible, because if he hadn't done that, none of that would have happened.
Yeah. I think it stands as one of the best dance remixes of all time, that version of Soon. And it was so sad that we lost Andy Weatherall just a little over 12 months ago.
It was such a shock, it really was, like, just out of the blue, literally out of the blue.
Mm.
He'd only been a little bit sick, briefly before that, I mean, with days, like a few days,
Kevin, it's 30 years this year, isn't it, since Loveless?
Yep.
What's it been like for you revisiting it once again for these remasterings and these reissues? Do you discover new things in it every time, or are there things you wish you'd done differently back then?
Not really. I think I got it right pretty much. Yes, there's always something that can be better, especially more on the mastering side of things. Mixing wise, there's one thing I would do differently that is not that noticeable, but is noticeable sometimes, and I'm never going to tell anyone because it'll only bug them like it bugs me. But that's one thing that does occur to me. I'm like, oh, I kind of shouldn't have done that, but it's a very minor thing. But no, the only interesting thing that happened when I was recutting the vinyl a few months ago was I was listening to it, and I was thinking quite often when I was doing it, some engineers and some people around me, especially when I was remastering in 2006, they were saying it sounds awful. They were going, why are you doing that? And I would be like, this is the way it is. This is what it sounds perfectly correct to me. And when I was doing the vinyl cut, I first played it on a cheap record player. We have a different quality record players, and I played on a cheap one first, which was a mistake because I suddenly thought, oh my God, it sounds horrible, and it sounded exactly the way the guy described it to me. And I was a bit like nervous for a bit. I was like, oh no, this is not good. And then as a reality check, I played the CD through the same system, and it also sounded horrible. So I was like, no, it's fine. It's the way it should be. But that was one kind of like, did I just go mad once and someone got away with it for all this time, But no. Well, I have another record, another setup, another hi-fi system that's much nicer and has much more bass and was much more proper. And when I played it on that, it was like, it's fine. It's all good.
Mm.
But yeah, I did have a moment of thinking, and I really thought it was me, you know. I thought it was like I basically finally discovered that the record I made was pretty horrible sounding. But it was just the record player and the speakers; they didn't match at all, and the amplifier.
There's so much mythology around Loveless. It's obviously considered to be one of the best albums ever made, but there's also this other side to it with, you know, the Creation Records story and all the talk around that over the years, around how much it cost and the effect on Creation Records.
Well, I'll tell you an interesting story. When we started, in the first week that we started Loveless, there was a band called Felt on Creation. And they had a concept to make an album every year, and they only wanted £2,000 to make the album. And they had to leave Creation in that first week because Creation didn't have any money to give them, because they literally had no money at all. And then after 8 weeks of being in the studio, our tapes were confiscated because Creation had no money. And, you know, it was really, they had just broken away from a distribution company, Rough Trade Distribution, a company that no longer exists. And they found himself broke, basically, you know, and they couldn't really function. At the end of Loveless, they were a multi-million-pound company with loads of successful bands on television, you know, and making deals all over the place, you know, licensing deals, etc. And, you know, they had really nice offices, and yeah, that was the end. So all I can say is they had no money at the beginning, and at the end they were very rich and very successful. And even sure, they had problems, but on a rich, successful level, you know, not like their first, as I said, the first week they couldn't afford to pay the bills or give £2,000 to a band to finish an album. So, you know, they were losing bands. So that's real, you know. And so the idea that we caused them any financial strain is abstract to us, as I said, because I watched them grow from being literally penniless to being quite successful, you know. Al McGee lived in really nice hotels the whole time, and yeah, and just spent money on all sorts of enjoyments and indulgences. So yeah.
So at the time, you weren't feeling like it was impossible for you to finish Loveless. That there was there anxiety around finishing off
No, not at all.
The music on it?
No, not at all. I mean, essentially the timeline of the record was that we started in September of '89. Things went bumpy very quickly, not with the songs or anything, but with how we recorded them, because Colin had become quite ill, and so we started to move into programming drums as opposed to recording them, and that meant there was weeks lost doing kind of learning how to use a computer and the sampler and creating these really elaborate programs, because we didn't want them to sound like they were programmed. And then still within 3 months, we had all of the backing of Loveless recorded. As I said, by February, March, we had the Glider EP done. Like, there was a sense of constant progress. And then by the spring of sort of 1990, most of the guitars were done, most of the main guitar parts, and quite a lot of the overdubs. Like a song like Only Shallow was completely recorded except for the vocals, but all the music was finished. And so it felt it was reasonably productive, you know, not by the standards of making an album in 2 months, but from the point of view from our perspective, something was happening more or less all the time, even though we wouldn't work in every studio. Sometimes we'd go to a studio and we'd have trouble and we'd just leave. So a week would be lost, and that happened quite a lot for various reasons, because there were a lot of studios doing cheap deals back in those days, because a boom that existed in the early to mid 80s kind of collapsed, and there was loads of mid-range studios with no maintenance, but lots of nice gear. So it was kind of, sometimes it worked out really well, and sometimes it was like, we have to get out of this place. We can't record without getting electric shocks or buzzes on the recordings or something.
Mm.
But anyway, but then in the summer of 1990, everything did go a bit strange. And it was during the Gulf War, when that first Gulf War happened. And what I do remember that period, as being, that's when we did a lot of experimenting with feedback and sampling it and creating, kind of programmed, parts out of that. And I think that's the part that if someone wanted to characterize us as a sort of being in the studio, experimenting and not really doing that much or finishing anything, that was that period in the summer of 1990 up until around the autumn of 1990. And then we kind of started working quite quickly again. And then to the point where when we got to the vocal part, like when we got to the vocals, we were working at a kind of relatively normal speed as any band. We did most of the vocals in about 2 or 3 weeks, mostly in 2 weeks, and mixed the album in a relatively normal space of time, like kind of taking about 2 days per track to mix it. So it didn't feel, as I said, there was a period in the summer of 1990 till the autumn where it's very hard to account for. That's the best way to put it. It's just like, what did we do? Like, I can hardly remember anything, all other than constantly sampling feedback, and experimenting with drum programs and things. But we hardly recorded anything, But all the rest of the time, it was quite purposeful, really, just with lots of gaps all the time of just being in the studio for 2 weeks and leaving and going, messing around like that. There's a lot of that,
Yeah.
going on.
How do you account, Kevin, for the difference in the way you treated the vocals on Isn't Anything and Loveless, where, you could hear what you were singing much more clearly a lot of the time on Isn't Anything, but then by the time you got to Loveless, it was being treated very differently, much more texturally.
Yeah. I think, well, Isn't Anything, obviously, part of our whole attitude was for it to be quite raw and easy to do. And so even doing double track vocals was sort of not really a thing. It is on a couple of songs where I said I'll have all the vocals, all the vocal takes. And that was on All I Need and Sue Is Fine. But everything else is pretty much mostly, except for Belinda, some things that she did with the oohings and things that we double tracked. But all the lead vocal parts with lyrics were as raw as possible, actually. And then by the time we got to doing Soon and the Loveless era kind of time, I got very much into the idea of that the music should be kind of this one thing that's very much, the idea of the vocals standing out from the music really seemed really wrong to me. It just needed to be there within it, so the frequencies of the guitar and the vocals sort of shared a lot, and the differences were becoming less apparent, really. And that was partly because I really wanted everything to be like in a space where when you listen to it, it's kind of, for me, ultimately, it was just, that's the way it had to be. The simple way of putting it. It couldn't be any other way. I wanted it just like that. But the effect of it was that it really helps people people's imagination basically becomes part of what they're hearing to some degree. I don't mean it in a bad way or, in a kind of way that belittles the music. It's more that what they hear in the music shifts and changes because the focus is less obvious. So your mind is able to easily shift focus, and that makes you listen differently and hear things differently all the time. So the person that's listening to the record kind of becomes part of the record,
Yep.
And so that was a big thing, really, for that record, really. And that's why the vocals have that quality.
Did you spend much time working on the lyrical content, knowing that you were going to bury them?
Yes. I mean, that's the ironic part is most songs come about by, you know, messing about, you know, playing music, and then you just sort of write a song, and more than 75% of the time, most of the song comes together in minutes, you know, really, you know, 5 minutes, 10 minutes max, you know, and with lyrics, it's not like that. It's like nearly always a third or 50% of the lyrics come with the melody. And so when I'm writing lyrics anyway, there's very much that phenomena where the melody and some words are set in stone. It's like it just is what it should be, and it has a direction, and then finishing that usually takes a very long time. You know, it can take a whole night. You know, so it's and pain, a lot of like discomfort. You know, of just having to know that it has to be done, and having to get to that place where it comes naturally again. Can take hours and hours. You know, and then usually in a period of relatively short period of time, within an hour, the rest of it all fits together and becomes apparent. But yeah, but that process of getting to that place again, the first part of the lyrics usually, as I said, come very easily with the song, and the second part or the main part, you know, can be this painful process of just having to, and it's not painful of kind of writing and kind of going, that's not good and I'll change that. It's not really like that. It's more just trying to do it and applying it and listening to that, because there's always a guide vocal, and the guide vocal kind of has these sort of half lyrics, and just trying to find it, you know, and somehow I've not been lucky enough to sort of do that process, sit down, and then within an hour, I've suddenly got all the lyrics done, finished. You know, it's always seems to be like hours, and then it's the morning. If I start at midnight, it's like sometime it's 8 a.m. Suddenly, for an hour, everything happens. You know.
Yeah.
And that's usually how it happens.
And what about with Belinda? How did you two collaborate on the vocals for the songs?
Yeah, well, generally because I make up the vocal melody and that, so I create the guide vocal, and then when she's going to write lyrics, she's listening to that as well, and she will often take the phrasings and things that seem to work, you know, and incorporate them into what she's doing, and then she just adds her own thing to it, you know, and then so that will change the melodies slightly, certainly change the phrasings, you know, and yeah, that's pretty much how it happens. So she just does what she does, you know, just kind of creates her own lyrics from what she kind of hears what I'm doing, and makes them whatever she, you know, whatever she does. But it's and mostly it's fine, you know. Occasionally she's done stuff and I've been like, oh, it's too grating away from what the feel of the song is and the way it needs to come across and the way the melody needs to work. And then we'll have to relook at it, you know, and then she does try something different, you know, because sometimes with the sound of things and the way the images that they bring up, just as it just goes, it can be wrong, basically, you know. So I kind of do occasionally have to kind of go, can you do that again, you know? But mostly it's just mostly when she does lyrics, it's just it's kind of like it works really well, because when she, you know, because on the MBV album she didn't do very much, and that was partly because that record had a very, very strong theme going through it that it was impossible for anyone else to sort of. I had to do it in a certain way, but and like in the future, you know, I'm really looking forward to her writing a lot more
Mm.
You know, because it makes her sing better, you know, as well. Like I like the way she sings when she's. It's like I think even when I would write lyrics, I would get her to write lyrics as well. You know, so there's quite a few songs we have a co-writing credit on the lyrics because I would kind of write the song, but then she would also then write lyrics because it would be better, basically. You know, if she kind of interpreted the song her own way.
I think I read a story, Kevin, that I don't know whether it's true or not, that during the sessions for Loveless, that a lot that the engineers couldn't understand what you were singing or she was singing, and they weren't allowed to
Yeah,
listen while you were recording them. Is that true or mythology?
it's true.
Okay.
Yeah, basically, how we did all the vocals on Loveless is that there was this vocal booth. It was in a really nice studio. Most of it was done in a place called Britannia Row. It was Pink Floyd's studio. And Angeli Dutt, the engineer, was in the control room. And if it was me or Belinda, you know, what we did was we'd be in the control room, we'd be in the vocal booth area, and we put blankets up so no one could see in. We would basically do a kind of vocal test, you know, where and there was ample time to do it because the vocal test basically involved Belinda would be safe. If Belinda was singing, she would be singing, and just kind of, you know, basically, you know, making it all work with her lyrics and everything. She'd just basically be going through the song, you know, because usually the lyrics had just been written, you know, and that we were like, we're doing this song tomorrow, so that night everything would have to be finished. And while she's practicing, basically, you know, the levels would be checked, you know, but not much listening, you know, just like checking a little bit, you know, like, you know, they would hear her singing. But by the time it would be ready to record, I would just say, okay, all you can do is look at the meters to make sure that she's actually getting recorded. But we've already got the sound, and we know it sounds good. But when I want all of her vocals just to be done, and she'll do as many as she wants, because we did 48 tracks, so we had a separate 24 track machine. So I think we could do about 17 tracks of vocals if we wanted to. And so how we did them is Belinda would just sing until she was done. So she might do 10 or 12 takes. And then just to hear it, we would just put all the takes up at the same time and play them. So the first time the engineer would hear what she was doing would be when she was finished. And then I would only let them hear everything at the same time, not solo anything or anything like that, you know, just, and it was a weird concept I had. I had this, do you ever hear the idea of, like in quantum physics, where the observer affects the observed?
No. Explain.
Well, it's based on experiments when they split a photon, how that behaves is completely different if someone's looking at what's happening, or if it just is allowed to happen and they look at what happened after it happened. And so they realize on a quantum level it is a scientific fact that the person who observes something is affecting what's happening, basically. So I just kind of like the idea that we would have all these vocals recorded that were no one ever heard, if you know what I mean, properly. And so the engineer, as I said, who recorded them, never heard them individually, ever, or heard them being performed, or, you know, they just got to hear it once or twice when we'd sit back and listen and go, how did that go, you know? And and in my head, when I was going to mix it, I would just sort out the good ones, you know, and basically do a kind of comp thing, but, you know, with the desk, basically with automation. That was the plan. But was quite bizarre about, and I did the same thing. I just would go into the booth and sing as many times as I wanted, up to 17 tracks. And we'd listen back once with all my vocals at the same time and go, okay, that's good, and move on, you know, we're done. But when I was mixing it, I found that, strangely, most of the takes, the majority of them, would always be pretty good, and very similar. because we would go into a zone, I guess, after a few takes, we'd go into a kind of zone and sing it exactly the same each time. And when we would play them back, they would be virtually phasing with each other. They'd be so similar. Um, and I kind of realized that was part of the sound, then of the record, that it would be all of the vocals. So I would just get rid of the ones that were wrong, but I wouldn't, I would keep everything, and then just pick and listen to them very quickly. And then more nearly intuitively, just pick one of them and allow that to be slightly in the lead and give it a little bit more clarity. So most of the vocals on Loveless was one vocal a little bit clear, and then maybe 10 to 15 of them a bit more less clear, but all at the same time. That became the sound.
How do you think about the emotional tone of Loveless as compared with Isn't Anything?
Well, Isn't Anything was quite it was quite expressive, in a lot of the base emotions and things and sexuality and stories of psychopathic people and all stuff that we were experiencing. It was very much like a kind of a snapshot of that time, and Loveless was an awful lot more kind of it was about something else, it was about it was more about joining up the inside part of ourselves with the outside part, and that's why the whole approach to the lyrics was very much about capturing as much as possible that kind of unconscious way of saying things, so that a lot of the time when people hear the lyrics, they don't know, it doesn't make sense because the grammar is a little unusual sometimes. A bit like when people are half awake, when they're talking gibberish, they speak kind of with bad grammar kind of thing. And we allowed that to be part of that, and it was like an important part of it, so yeah, it was a very different approach, really, much more letting the unconscious part, but still saying stuff that was quite, that's why I hate describing the lyrics. I think it'll make some songs sound very dark, or a lot weirder than I want people to be able to let them be more a living thing in themselves, so that people can allow their own things to be part of it,
How much of that was based in your relationships within the band at present, back then?
A significant amount, definitely a significant amount. And but like me and Belinda were still in a relationship in that period. There was still a lot of not abstract exactly, but not our personal experiences. But they were personal. Sorry, not personal experience, but some other outside forces, for want of a better word, that were a little disruptive. That was a theme between all that material. That was one part of the theme. And that was something we're always dealing with on some level. So that is in there, but the personal aspect of our relationships, I guess, is there, but it's much more complicated. It's not like a simple story like Fleetwood Mac style, of people who are together and then broke up and are writing songs to each other. You know what I mean? Being really extreme. There's nothing like that. But yeah, but in reality, absolutely, there was. That's a significant part of the mix is the personal aspect of how things were. Yeah.
That's kind of a gift, really, though, as a songwriter, isn't it? Or when you're trying to craft an album that has like layers of emotional tone. Did you feel that it was all up for grabs in terms of capturing that on Loveless?
No, because it was, the record was largely guided by instinct, you know, and even, as I said, even with the writing process, instinct was a huge part of it. As opposed to laboring over things, it's more like creating the right environment, and then you could do something very fast and allow it to happen quite naturally. And with the lyrics and stuff, it was a similar thing. Most, you know, from my perspective, the lyrics would be, they would start very subconsciously and naturally, and yet it was like my inner self speaking out loud, you know, and that would inspire me to, you know, finish the song in a certain way. And you know, as I said, the laborious process of the lyrics and all that kind of stuff was more laborious to get to the point where it's that state of mind where it all flows quite naturally.
This year being the 30th anniversary of Loveless, have you reflected at all on, you know, the resonance of the album within 2021 and the kind of weird times that we've had over the last 12 months? Have you reflected on that at all as you get ready to, you know, release it digitally into the world?
I mean, I have to admit, you know, it did occur to me that our music might make more sense to some people that it wouldn't have made sense to before, because they've been pulled a bit out of their comfort zone, I guess, you know, and the conflicting feelings that, or not conflicting, but the kind of more complicated, I guess, is a way of putting it more, or yeah, I can't really think of the word anyway, but those more complex things, where there's sort of a sense of things breaking down at the same time as things being born, you know, that feeling, that is more in the air now. So it definitely feels like it might resonate with some people more than it would have, but you know, everything is so much more multi-dimensional than that anyway, so it's difficult to make too much of a connection, but at the same time, like, I guess in the sense that we've always been associated with a certain sense of melancholy, you know, to some level, but it's not traditional melancholy, you know. It also has senses of elation, or, you know, other things that don't fit into that at all. So I think that's a little bit in the air, you know, where there's a sort of a sadness, but a mixture of hope and also craziness as well.
Yes.
You know, so yeah, I don't feel out of sync with the times, that's for sure. But there's always a sort of positivity in everything that we do, actually, you know. That's part of the complex emotional element of it, you know, that it's not just one thing. So
yeah,
you know,
that's right. That goes back to that textural sort of contrast that you're playing with so much in the music, and a lot of that is so hard to articulate in words in My Bloody Valentine's music, isn't it? As so many people have tried to over the years, but it's really something as a listener that you feel within a song, you know, as songs sort of switch up even within a song and also within an album. I feel like at the moment people are at home a lot more and maybe having the opportunity to spend time with albums. That's an ideal environment to connect with My Bloody Valentine, isn't it? Because I don't know, listening to individual songs to me, maybe with the exception of Soon, has never felt like it gives the band
justice. Yeah, I know what you mean. I know in that respect, we're not really in sync with the times at all, you know, because we live in an age of songs and not albums, really. But at the same time, that's always been the thing about albums, is that you should find them. You know, they shouldn't be shoved down your throat. And I think something that went a little bit wrong with music was that albums became something that was virtually like people kind of knew that there was going to be quite a few bad songs, and a record company would say you only need 2 good songs and then it's going to be successful, and it doesn't matter what the rest are, people don't need to listen to it, you know. And that kind of thing, I think rightly kind of has been damaged and destroyed a bit. And I think, but in the meantime, there's lots of people making really interesting albums, you know, and that I don't think that'll ever stop, you know. And I think the idea of listening to a whole album will exist always, because I think the reason is simply because even if you took traditional folk music or classical music or any kind of ethnic music anywhere around the world, there's hardly any song that goes on for 3 minutes only. You know what I mean? It's like most music, when you're not trying to fit into a radio format or a pop song thing, is you know, expansive. And the idea of listening to music for half an hour would, you know, is not a big deal. You know, it's like normal. It's like normal for us to sort of immerse ourselves in something for you know, 40 minutes or an hour or 2 hours, whatever. It's completely something we've done for thousands and thousands of years. And I think just the cynical quality of what an album became, of just a product that was important, that it had to have a few hit singles on it, and had to be, and it was something that would generate loads of money. That created this phenomena of the album is possibly bad, you know, and people would just prefer to have some tracks that they like, and the rest of it they don't really care for. And I think that's fine, you know. I think if somebody makes a record that compels people to want to hear it as a whole, then you've made a really good album. And if you haven't done that, it's not a very good album, and it's too bad if people only want to hear 2 tracks on it. You know what I mean? I think that's kind. I think it's kind of fair, you know. I think, but I do think the idea of making music that's not just meant for 3 minutes long or 4 minutes or something, or 2 minutes, the way it's going even now, because of short attention spans, you know, making 1.5 and 2 minute long tracks is getting kind of popular. It's kind of, and it's fine. It's all good. But there's always going to be a need for people to immerse themselves in a mood and a certain thing, and enjoy that journey. And, you know, it's not much fun listening to jazz for just 3 minutes, and that, you know what I mean? Or I'll go to a classical concert, it's 3 minutes long. You know what I mean? It's like, you just feel like, what? You know, or you're with an African tribe or somewhere in the Brazilian jungle, and they all decide to start playing music, and they end after 3 minutes and go, that was a good one, wasn't it? Do you know what I mean? You know what I mean? It was kind of, you know, mostly you want music to go on. You know, you don't want it to end. You know, you want things to just, and if you're in the mood of something, if you're into Black Sabbath or some hip hop something, you want it just to keep on happening. You know, you just don't want it to end after 2 or 3 minutes.
Yes.
You know?
So Kevin Shields, when, you know, in between Loveless and making MBV, 22 years, how much of that time were you thinking about the changes that were going on broadly within music? Because, like, I mean, when Loveless came out, CDs were coming in, and when MBV came out, CDs were going out.
Yeah.
You skipped that whole period.
I know.
But there were so many musical changes in the landscape as well. I don't know. I don't even know how you account for 22 years slipping past between My Bloody Valentine albums. That's kind of crazy when you think about it now, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. You know, it really is. It's yep. I often wonder myself. Like sometimes because I know it happens, so it doesn't bother me. You know, I'm perfectly at ease with everything. But in the meantime, occasionally I think about it and I think, what the fuck happened to, you know what I mean? Like what happened? You know, but you know, I was on my own personal journey anyway during a lot of that, so that was the kind of, I don't feel a moment was wasted, you know, in a weird way, you know. So I got, in all that time, I got to do something that I would never have probably done if I was really active and touring all the time. being more present, you know. So that was, I don't regret
What do
it
you mean
either.
specifically?
Oh, I just got really into I guess what you might call meditation, for want of a better word, you know.
Yeah.
But but I got I was just lucky because I just was pretty much was reading a book, and something in the book said something about the imagination is a door to other worlds, and I was just thinking, yeah, the imagination, like what can I really imagine in my mind's eye and see, you know, as opposed to imagine it in a more abstract way. Could I actually see it like it's kind of an object I can kind of look around and, you know, like it's a three-dimensional object. And I just started doing that just in this kind of curiosity, and the simple way of putting it, one thing led to another, and I went on a 4-year journey for, you know, that was really quite it kind of taught me a lot about a lot. It's the only way I can put it.
Are you talking about transcendental meditation?
Yeah, but yes, and yeah, and also anything to do with you might call your third eye and your inner eye, and like if you open that, for one better way of putting it, you can like when people take drugs and things, you know, as well, but you know, but it's it's quite different than taking LSD or any kind of drugs that are psychedelics or anything like that, in some ways. But you do begin to see the building blocks of consciousness, for want of a better word, and building blocks of vision, and the things that actually are archetypal and culturally shared, and they're from our DNA. It's not like you're hallucinating something in your mind based on what you've experienced in your life. You're experiencing things and seeing things and having an inner world that is actually part of all people, you know, and all cultures, and it's interpreted differently. And that was just really interesting, and yeah, it was kind of like something I was extremely into. I discovered that I don't know if this is true, but by practicing that a lot, you actually learn your brain produces more DMT, which is like a bit like a psychedelic drug, but it's actually produced in our brain naturally when we dream. Mm-hmm. There's a thing called the hypnagogic state. Do you ever hear of that term?
It's like a trance state?
Yeah, basically it's a theta brainwave state. It's also related to the song You Made Me Realize, and that whole thing when the audience would change. I think that was the beginning of that part of the journey that I was beginning to go on, that I went as deeply as possibly humanly possible, really, I guess. And then the period when I joined Primal Scream, and up to the point of the mid 2000s, when I played with Patti Smith and started doing my own music again. That period was also a period where I experimented with what you might call crappy drugs, you know, like, you know, party drugs, and but that was for quite different reasons than, say, might seem apparent. You know, it was part of quite complicated, really, without going into too much. But basically, I'd kind of, for want of a better word, developed a mind over 4 years that where I closed my eyes and I could be into a state that most people would take a long time and a lot of relaxation to get into. You know, and that just became a natural state between being awake and asleep. That came like a flick of a finger with me, and as part of that, there's a whole personal spiritual journey that you go on, that I needed to in some way close that world down and see what's real, for want of a better word, you know. And in that journey, I discovered that what's real is not dependent on any state of mind or any condition or anything. And that was the most profound thing that I learned. So that was quite a long journey that started in the early 90s and didn't finish until, as a journey, for want of a better word, didn't finish until the early 2000s, But it was, what other people would do is they would go off and stay in a Buddhist, Leonard Cohen, stay in a Buddhist monastery for years and meditate, or go off and go to India or whatever people do, or join it, become part, a student of a shaman or something, all different things that people do that, are all part of a journey thing that you can do in your life. And I just had the time to do that, I guess. Whatever happened, happened, So I guess what I'm saying is, for me, there was this incredible journey happening during all that time. That was a personal thing. So, and I came full circle, and back to as normal as you can possibly imagine, but with the added knowledge that we're all just one thing.
Yeah.
Being everything.
So after you came after you took that journey, you came full circle, and you came to MBV, that album, did you feel like something had fundamentally shifted in the way that you thought about My Bloody Valentine's music 22 years on a personal level? Because there are obvious connections in the sound.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing was that record was started in 96, and
right.
I worked on it for about 6 months or 4 months, I can't really remember, but sometime like that, between the end of 96 and the beginning of 97. And then the record company quite fairly pulled the plug on me because I had reached the limit of the amount that they said they would ever give me to spend. And I was like, okay. And then I drifted off into playing with Primal Scream for quite a few years. And when I revisited that record back it was in 2006, I kind of realized, actually, because I thought I'll finish it, but I'll finish it as an EP or some kind of side project. And when I heard it, I realized actually it's a really good album. It works as an album, and it means more to me, actually, weirdly enough, as a record than it meant in 96. The theme of it was more intense, and it still took me a few years. We the band got back together. We went on tour. We toured in 2008 and 2009, and then it took me until 2011 to sort of get together to really, approach the record to finish it. And so I spent that time from 11 and 12 finishing the record, and kind of, I guess, 70% of what you hear was recorded in 11 and 12, 2011 and 12. So it kind of felt like I'd explored something. It got parked or put aside for a while, and then when I came out the other side, it was even more relevant to me, actually, than when I thought it would be. I didn't, I was only remembering some of the tunes, but when I heard it all together, I was like, this should be finished. So, but it was basically just some program rhythm parts and some guitar parts, and that was it.
There was such a weight of expectation around that album because it had been talked about for so long, and you'd talked about it for so long as being nearly finished, and then it never appeared.
Yeah.
And everybody wanted the follow-up to Loveless and was at times despairing that it would never come. How do you even make an album under those sort of expectations? Like, it just seems crazy.
It felt like a thing into itself. So I didn't think I'm making a follow-up to Loveless, or I did have those thoughts, and that's why I thought I won't finish this to be the follow-up. I'll finish it as a side project or a sort of extra special thing when after I've made a new album, a new proper album. But the kind of what was good about the record was better when I went to finish it than when I started it, actually. So it was it felt kind of quite present, actually. You know, it was quite weird. You know, it was strange working with old stuff, only from the point of view of one of the songs was the tapes had nearly rotted, you know, so we had to copy them, and I was working analog, so I was working with a copy, and the copies, which way the tapes were copied, the pitch changed, like it wasn't in concert tuning. It was hard to tune, basically, too. And the way I played the guitar, unfortunately, was very, very freeform with the pitch. So I do remember at one point spending 5 days literally trying to get the bass to be in tune with the guitar, you know, because we just couldn't figure out what the hell happened. But it was just like it's some bizarre pitch that had nothing to do with concert pitch, you know. And there was a handful of things like that, you know, that were just like, oh God, this is so difficult compared to just making a record.
Yeah, yeah. When you say the theme of the album, what do you mean?
I kind of, around that point in '96, I was kind of pretty aware that I could see that the world, the way it was going, was absolutely I grew up from a child in a very kind of actually quite an ecologically aware time. It was one of the themes of the '70s. I remember it was always being talked about, you know, and you know, that it's where the idea of tree huggers and, you know, save this and save the whale and all these concepts were really becoming popular, and it was just part of normal life. And then for me, really, just by the late '90s, you know, when it became an all pervasive feeling that, you know what, this is all pretty much on its way out. Everything, the way the trajectory we've been on for thousands of years is kind of over. And so there was a song called "Nothing Is" on the MBV album, and that was one of the key tracks that I'd done in '96. That the sense of ominous, stressy energy, you know, that something is going to pop or go or something. There's a problem, basically, you know, and but my out viewpoint of all that was positive, in the sense that I think, okay, we're at the end of things, but this is a kind of a necessary part of evolution, you know. We just have to, we're conscious enough to know this, so we can become something else, you know, than what we have been. And so it was, you know, it wasn't like a 2012 kind of main calendar thing about the end of the world or any of that stuff. It was nothing like that. It was more that we're actually in a time of where that's like a cycle that's in everything. It's not just the climate or anything like that. It's everything. You know, it's just it's there, like there is relationships between historical periods of time and the way society suddenly changes and collapses of society and all that. And I didn't see it as a dark collapse. I just saw it as a time of acknowledged change. You know, that people will be conscious that this is the end, and and then we go through a kind of a stressy time, and then we come out of that into a really kind of not a bright future, but something more kind of optimistic and forward moving, you know. Anyway, that was that was the kind of, that's where everything was kind of living, and that's why I kind of forgot about all that for a while, and that way of thinking, and then basically, as I said, revisited in 2006. Went, you know what, the world is clearly more like that than it was then. And then by the time I finished in 2013, the world was clearly much more like that. And now in 2021, it's even more clearly more like that. So I could have finished it last year and it would have made just as much sense. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I even talked about it, and I didn't want to talk about it at the time because I hate the idea of having a concept album and having concepts that, especially like that. It's sort of corny. You know, it's more like, I see it more like a graffiti tag saying, I was here and I could see all this shit happening, and like other millions of people do as well. And that's all it was, really. But I was, yeah, that was the overall feeling on that record, and didn't talk about it. And then in a Fender interview in early 2018, I just thought, fuck it, I am just going to talk about it a bit. So I did. And then by the end of 2018, that interview came out in May, and then by September, Greta Thunberg existed, you know, and I was talking about people, and I said, this is time for people and change, and people, and I said, in a few years' time, people will be going, oh shit, like what's happening, you know, the accelerated sense of change will become more apparent. I was using words like apparent. I was just sort of alluding to all that, you know, and then I guess it sort of started playing itself out more extremely all the time. And now we are where we are. So I guess it's just my way of reading dark clouds and going, oh, it's going to rain, you know. It's basically just that, you know.
MBV felt like it was sort of divided into 3 sections, and you know, Wonder, which I think is that this final song on it.
Yeah,
that's like, it's kind of like a new universe altogether.
Well, that's the end song. That's what I mean. And the song before that is Nothing Is, which is the really ominous part, which is where we are.
That's the song with all the propulsive drums.
Yeah,
you know?
And then the song before that is a song that's kind of, it sounds like something's wrong. It's like, it's got a kind of quality to it, but then it also has a kind of stoic answer to that, you know, within itself, you know. And those last 2 tracks are very much about what I was talking about. And the first track on the record was the last track that was recorded, because that was actually done in 2012, and that's kind of positive and awakening. And then the tracks after that are quite nostalgic, really. It's the acknowledgement of the end of things, and that's what that record is, kind of.
Yeah, well, that song Wonder, you know, it's unlike anything you've ever done before. Feels like at times that, you know, you recorded it under some sort of flight path.
Yeah. Yeah.
You've got that sort of mad beat buried underneath it.
Yeah. We had a big drum and bass phase before Colin left the band. We were programming so much drum and bass music.
Is that right?
But in the computer, we were doing it completely wrong. We hadn't got a clue, literally. And we were doing it our own way in a computer, and we were slowing it down. And we wanted to have this more jazzy, you know, mid-tempo, slowed down version of drum and bass, but with the same kind of breaks and the same kind of feel. And then an engineer taught me how to do it properly, because he was an engineer who worked with a drum and bass act. He was their main engineer, and he was like, "This is how we actually do it," and it was so much easier and so much more fun. So that drum part came about. That was my first real, like, oh, I'm doing it the way everyone else does it, and it's really great and easy, and you could do much more interesting things very fast. So that was that experiment, because I did the actual guitar part before I did the drums with that song, and the drums follow the guitar, basically. You know, that was the idea. That was, I wanted it to be like going through a bit like you're going through a you know, like when you know, well, I was talking about going into your own mind and you're traveling through tunnels, you know, as people have experienced, if they took drugs or whatever, meditated or whatever, that's a common, again, human experience that anyone can experience.
What's your favorite drum and bass album?
I wouldn't say I really have one. I mean, I did like the Goldie album when it came out, but as a form of music, I didn't really follow it past, like, when it first existed. We lived in South London, and we were quite lucky that there was a couple of pirate radio stations. It was before digital and all that kind of stuff, and everything was radio. There was a lot of pirate radio stations, and so somebody would literally put on a block of flats, something to put the signal out, and you could pick it up for about 2 miles around that building. And we seemed to have about 2 or 3 really brilliant pirate radio stations playing drum and bass music. And between that and going to clubs, which we did, I would say 95% of everything I heard, I didn't even know what it was called. You know, a lot of it, because so much of it was actually created in the mixes. You know, it would be live DJing, so they would have the same record, but mashing their own record up together. It was like a really common thing back in those days. And they take drum breaks and stretch them out for a minute long, you know, and do all this kind of stuff. So that was basically my main experience of all that, you know. And I don't think I can't really think of one, you know, except for the Goldie album from back in those days. So I can't really think of anything that I think by the time I started being less interested in it, that's when it began to move much more into a genre of artists and bands. But the original phase of drum and bass was extremely DJ based and spontaneous, really, actually. That was my experience of it.
I love that Ronnie Size and Represent album, New Forms. That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I like that. And funny enough, because he was much more about the jazz thing, you know, and playing live instruments, and that, ironically, we were experimenting with something a bit like that, but more mid-tempo. But it came from we were very influenced by that whole Jungle Brothers and that jazz hip hop scene that existed also around that time.
Yeah,
it was just before that, and so that was something that we were really into. And like A Tribe Called Quest and all that as well. And I saw a real strong link between drum and bass. And what Ronnie Size did is he created that strong link between jazz music and, you know, drum and bass.
Yeah.
And I really like that. I mean, there's a lot of, you would probably name stuff and I'll elaborate on it for you, but I'm terrible at picking things out of the air like that. But I guess I probably got all of that stuff when it happened, you know. But,
totally.
But I didn't. The stuff that really, really affected me was really the stuff I would just hear in clubs and on the pirate radio stations and stuff, because that was mind blowing stuff. So
the final song on MBV, you know, Wonder, sent you off, you know, into the stratosphere,
Wonder
into
2.
this.
It's Wonder 2.
Sorry,
Sorry.
Wonder 2. Sent you off into this sort of stratosphere of new sound. Where is your head at now, like in 2021? Like what is going on for My Bloody Valentine at the moment?
We're pretty much recording a new album. That's basically what we're doing. We did start it a few years ago. It turned into EPs and then albums and 2 albums and 2 40-minute albums, and now it's going to be 1 40-minute album, 2 or 3 EPs, and a double album. So
what?
Yeah, that's where we're at. That's what we're doing in our heads, anyway. And practically speaking, we're finishing 1 album right now.
What limitations do you put around yourself, Kevin, in terms of actually getting this album out?
At the moment, it's the knowledge that it takes 3 months because of the huge demand on vinyl. Like, we've got the best pressing plant in Europe, and we're extremely lucky that they're really, really cool with us. You know, we have a really brilliant working relationship with them, which we developed ourselves before we worked with Domino. You know, and even with all of that, it still takes 3 months now to get vinyl out. You know, so if I work back from the end of the year, and I'm thinking, you know what I mean? That's what's happening right now. I'm just going, shit. It's a 3 month bit that we have to just factor into all this of nothing happening, you know, after we finish the record. You
haven't been playing live though, have you?
No. We just played. Last time we played live was in 2018.
Yeah.
And we did a short tour, which we cut short actually because we were trying to get this EP finished and we failed miserably. Played a couple of the songs from the EP live, just to kind of get them out there. They were what we recorded versions of them, only what we had got, you know, which is basically a vocal, guitars and drums with no any other ideas added. And anyway, we cut the short. We just thought, well, we're not going to keep on touring without, we had booked the tour thinking we were going to have this record finished. So we just did the gigs that we booked, didn't book anymore. And then so we'll try and finish this record, but it won't be an EP anymore. It'll be an album. So that's what happened, kind of, and then we just went on a journey of getting Domino involved, and then also dealing with coronavirus and the whole scenario, and becoming super independent here in our studio.
Is the whole band involved in making the new album?
Yeah, basically. I mean, it's the same as usual, but yeah, same as always.
And do you have a concept for it?
No, not really. I wrote a lot of stuff actually in the past 6 months, and some of it has to be on this new record. So I'm going to see I'm going to actually work on that before I start finishing even some of the other stuff, and I'll see where it goes. I did have a very strong concept. The first one would be quite warm and more song-based, and the second one would be much more expansive and more as part of an experiment of writing in a new way, where you wouldn't be able to play the songs just on the guitar or a piano or something. You would need at least two musicians to play them, because they involve lots of interlocking parts. So, but that concept is shifting all the time, I guess, as they do. But I don't really work the concepts, but that was the musical direction, and yeah. So I seem to always basically, if I start doing something in one direction, I develop a quick need to do something in another direction a little bit, and that's why the records do have a certain balance to them, because everything makes me want to do something else. So that balances a little bit.
What are your rules around songwriting?
None in particular, to be honest, at all. Rules, none. I think I did take the idea of working instinctively to a limit nearly, and which is why I'm starting to work with other ways of writing music now. Because before, everything I did was essentially, I have a guitar and I just start creating a song. It's very simple, or a keyboard, and just create a song. But it's done quite like most people make something up. So, but I've got a huge need to hear music that's something like something else that I haven't done before, and some of it no one's done before, really. But I guess, and I just need to do that, So, and I can't do it by sitting with a guitar in my hand. I need to. It's something that would take, as I said, 2 or 3 of me, and then if I had 3 of me at the same time, I could do it, But and it's something you can't do with a drummer or a bass player and 2 guitar players either. It would take. It would basically take 2 bands, and if you had 2 bands mirror imaging each other, then you could do what I'm trying to do. And to write that kind of music is quite experimental, because it doesn't come naturally to me. But the result is screaming out to be heard. You know what I mean? It's like something inside going, "Come on, for God's sake, do it, please! It's here. I'm ready. I'm waiting to be born." Yeah. So I guess that's what's driving me to a large degree is to try and experiment with that. But as I said, that very thing then creates in me the need to do something very simple, So that's why everything just becomes out the way it comes out, with different directions and things. Because I guess, I don't know, that's the way it is for me anyway. So
have you been listening to? Sorry, have you been listening to anything in particular that's been feeding into it? Like, do you find that that you gravitate towards particular types of music, either new or stuff that you've always been inspired by when you're writing?
No, I mean, I think I'm probably like a lot of people. If I like a song, that means so much more to me than anything. You know, like if a song is a good song, that somehow emotionally affects me.
Mm.
And it's that special emotion that you can get. I think I can personally only get from music, which is that really super complicated emotion of feeling emotionally moved by it, but also a really incredible sense of kind of like upliftedness, you know, and sort of like strength, really. You know what I mean? I feel like it's like a superpower feeling, you know. And I guess it's what makes people want to jump around, you know, to music, but unmoved to music. You know, it's like you're consumed by an energy, but it's like when I watch a film, I can feel happy, sad, you know, disturbed, whatever. You know, I can go through all those emotions, and at the end of it, you can feel really depressed or really happy or really, you know, like, oh, that was really sad. You know what I mean, or whatever. It can really work with your emotions, but with music, like in a very short space of time, it's like these super complicated, really giant emotions. You know, that's what happens to me anyway. I don't even know what your question was.
It was around. It was around inspiration. You know.
Yeah. So basically, with anything that makes me feel that feeling, which can be something that's not melodic, but more often than not, when there's a song involved, which or something melodic that gets me feeling in a certain way, you know, I find that inspiring, and that can be very random, you know. But for example, I was listening to, as an album, I was listening to Frank Ocean, the Blonde album. It was just kind of when I got Spotify last year, and I was checking albums out, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna check Frank Ocean out, you know. And I was listening to that and just going like this really loving the whole thing, you know, and loving the journey he was going on with the music and just the attitude to things and stuff, you know. And it wasn't necessarily any of those songs were creating that incredibly powerful feeling I'm talking about, but it was that the overall thing was really, it was constantly engaging and constantly like, it just felt like, yeah, one of those really great records feeling, you know. So, but I'll hear songs by a band that I don't even like that much sometimes, but the song, that what they do will just be really good, you know. And that sticks with me. So
simplicity is a good thing to be reminded about in music, isn't it? When you have a propensity to disappear down a rabbit hole of complexity.
Yeah. I'm lucky in that respect, that even though I have the capacity to be over detailed in some respects, I also love minimalism, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, they balance each other out a bit, I think.
Yeah, I think that you could just call that being well-rounded, don't you, Kevin?
Yeah, or sort of. Yeah.
So what are you saying?
Like a beach ball.
You're making an album now. It's not going to be a double album. It's not going to be 2 EPs. Hopefully it's going to be out by the end of the year. It might be a mirror image of My Bloody Valentine as you plus 2 or 3 versions of yourself.
This first one won't be so much like that, but there'll certainly be hints of it because I can't help myself. But the second one will be that very much. Yeah.
Well, no, hang on. Yeah. Just back up there. Are you actually saying that there's going to be 2 My Bloody Valentine albums?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Full albums.
Yeah, 100%, absolutely.
Are you making a double album?
It looks like it because basically the idea of what was going to happen is we believed that last year we were going to basically record both of those albums, and be on tour this year. So what we were going to do is complete both records, have the first one come out, then go on tour pretty much after that, and then while we were on tour, have the second one come out. And that was basically our plan. That was what we were working towards. And then when coronavirus happened, it slowed things down for us quite a lot, and there was various things that happened, and we went through another big slow phase, and then the process of getting the whole back catalogue together and getting it out became quite a bit more involved, because we decided to improve all the artwork and do some more cuts and just do a general kind of upgrade of everything. And I realized that this idea of getting two records out right beside each other and being on tour is not going to happen, because I don't know when we're going to be on tour again. Hopefully next year, but that's probably, but not, it's not definite still. And so I just thought, we'll use the time of this year to basically, I'll just do finish the first record, and then I'll let the second record be as long as it's going to be. The idea of just getting two records done, they were being recorded. They've been recorded at the same time, essentially. Virtually, what we call the second album was started first, and that exploration and constant experimenting with this kind of process provoked me to give all that up for a bit and just focus on making quite simple songs. And that's what I would make it. I'll make an EP of simple songs, and as I said, so that's why that's why it became two things. And I didn't want to take away from one by trying to mix them up. I want particularly what I call the second album to be totally free, but the first one has a bunch of songs on it that I really, really like, and they have to come out. So that's what's happening, basically.
So you're looking at one album which is simple songs, and the other album is going to be much more complex material, more expansive. That's your free jazz album, is it? The second one? Kind of, yeah, kind of. The second one is more. They're merging into each other a little bit, to be honest with you. But point is that's where we got to about now. But that's why the two album idea came about, because as I said, we started off on that trajectory, and then I guess I got a little bit, I reacted to that a bit and went, no, I want to write songs that work just as me on the guitar, first, and make it more simple, I'd done something, what provoked it partly was I'd done this thing in Iceland. Sigur Rós were doing a kind of festival thing. They said, do you want to come and do something? I was like, okay, I'll do it, just for a nice trip to Iceland, really. And I decided to write an hour. They said, would you play for an hour? And I said, okay. And I thought, I'll just write music for an hour. I'll write an hour's worth of music that I'll play. And they were kind of songs. That process of doing that made me really enjoy that simple thing that works with one guitar can create something that is quite all-encompassing, and they're based on kind of song structure ideas, with melodies and all that kind of stuff. And one of those I did for that, or two of them even, maybe, but definitely one of them is going to be on this record, the first album. It's one of the ones we played live as well, and this is called New One. I thought it was called on the set list, and so that was that, and that all that process happened in 2018, around that time, the beginning. So, and we started working on this album in 16, the ideas phase, in 17. It was a lot of experiments with Pro Tools with this idea of writing in a certain way, and so I was rebelling in a way against my grand idea, and as I said, that's why
I got the idea of 2 EPs, 2 albums, 2 whatever. You know what I mean? It was just I didn't want one to be too compromised by the other. You know, it would be better to just do it as 2 separate things. I mean, somebody would just do it as a double album. You know, some other people, but I didn't want that. You know, I thought it'd be cooler if it was just 2 albums.
I think that's a really cool idea. I hope that you can kind of get it finished.
Yeah, me too. I mean, that's my, you know, I have a track record of absolute failure when it comes to meeting deadlines and doing all that kind of stuff.
I wasn't going to say that, but yeah, that's true.
It's true. It's very true. And so we'll see, we will see what happens. That's the thing. We will see what happens. But that's what we think we're doing, you know.
If you were Domino Records, would you sign My Bloody Valentine?
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's low risk. It's it's like they've got our back catalog. They'll be fine. You know, it's like they won't be out of pocket. That's for sure. I can tell you that much. It's like it'll all be fine. You know.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think. I mean, it's not. But what we haven't done is we haven't done some kind of a deal where someone gives us a lot of money to make a record that we haven't made yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's more structured with Domino that we create the music and then they give us some money. You know what I mean? So it's a bit more like that. You know what I mean? So
That's safer.
Yeah, it's better as well. It's healthier. You know, it's like it's kind of, you know, it's been fine. It's been great so far. You know, but you know, it's kind of we've structured everything into the back catalog and the new stuff. So at the moment we're just functioning on that back catalog stuff, and it's up to us to create the new stuff if we want to get any money from them. You know.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much it. You know, but that's I think that's the way I prefer to do it. You know, I didn't really enjoy that process in the past of having this mounting sense of, it was with the Island Records that had happened. You know, there was like we were just owing them a lot of money, you know, and it didn't feel very good. You know, I didn't like that feeling. So I'll avoid that in the future.
What's your hearing like, Kevin? I know you've talked about it in the past.
Yeah. It's okay. You know, it's I really felt about 5 or 6 years ago that I could see a change happening with my sensitivity, that I became quite aware of that. You know, I was like, I might not be able to do what I do in 5 years, you know. And then now it's 6 years later, and I'm okay. You know, it's like my I have tinnitus.
Yeah.
You know, so that's actually worse that it's been, you know, for a while. I'm not really sure why, but my actual hearing, bizarrely with that, I actually put it down to, I think a weird thing happened to me where, because I concentrate on sound all the time, and my hearing has, you know, diminished as I get older. Even, you know, even if you don't listen to loud music ever, you don't hear as well as you get older. That's just the way it is. But I think because I'm listening to, you know, focusing on music a lot, I think that whatever volume control is inside my brain, it's turned it up from sort of like 7 to 9. You know, it's like everything's a bit turned up. You know, that's the only way I could describe it. So, in a weird kind of way, and because I've been doing a lot of like close listening over the past good few years, I kind of hear better in a strange way. It's really strange. Like I was listening to stuff I've done before and going, I can hear problems with that, you know, and just things that I didn't notice before. And just listening to, we're listening to the difference between cables recently, you know, because we're doing a lot of mastering work, and we have really good equipment to do that. And we realized the cables were the weak link, you know, and just getting into that, you know, on a kind of quite an extensive level, and hearing things that I've never even been conscious of before, you know.
Yeah.
So it's weird. It's like, even though I know I don't hear as well as I did 5 years ago, and I won't hear as well as I hear now 5 years from now. Maybe, or maybe I will. Maybe they're inventing some new injection where you can actually get your hearing back. Apparently, on stage 2 of the trials. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Just before coronavirus happened, it was a big thing, and it seems to work. And,
is that because people are losing their senses because of coronavirus? Is that?
No, I mean just before coronavirus hit, before all that happened in 2019, there was a lot of news because this one particular company in the UK had got to stage 2 of the trials. The first stage was successful, second stage was happening, and the third stage is the slightly longer term, and it was already successful. It was working. That basically people, with hearing damage from noise, were getting literally an injection into their ear, and literally growing back their hearing.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's true. That's real. So whether that gets through all the stages and it turns out to be safe, and the people don't wind up with some bizarre, crazy problems with their hearing afterwards, because it keeps on growing and they go mad or something, But if it works, that would be lovely. That'd be a great, an amazing thing to experience. But
yeah.
But my brain is actually better with sound than as years go by. And as I said, I feel like I'm in this weird place at the moment where I'm quite sensitive to sound and I'm quite sensitive to loud volume. But when I'm working in the studio, I'm hearing things quite better in a way, more clearly. Maybe I've got my monitoring really sorted out. I don't really know. But I did really upgrade my that side of things a lot, over the years. Because I've got really good quality headphones and worth thousands of pounds and just whatever, very arguably the best quality of certain things. You know what I mean? So maybe I've just educated myself better from that. I don't know. I don't really know what's happened, but all I do know is that I'm absolutely no way worse than I was 20 years ago. When it comes to being able to make a record or anything like that. That's for sure. Because it's weird but true.
That's a blessing, isn't it? And
yeah.
also your memory's really good.
My memory?
Yeah, it seems so.
Okay. It seems it's okay. Sometimes all the pot smoking over the years, when I used to smoke, I don't smoke much now. And coronavirus put a big damper on it over here in Ireland. But basically, but when I used to, I would be quite Alzheimer's-y at times. You know what I mean? Because I'm a bit dyslexic as well. I've always had a bit of a thing with, words and reading and stuff like that. I pronounce words wrong because I'm just not reading them properly at all, and not seeing them properly. And I would sometimes think, wow, if somebody was to test me right now, I would be like somebody with Alzheimer's or something. It's totally not be able to think of any words for things, I get like that on occasion, but not much nowadays. But yeah.
Do you remember your visits to Australia?
I do very well. Yeah, I do. It's weird. They're very, I think I've always been there in the summer, and it's such a kind of it's so bright, it's kind of, it's not even unlike LA when I first went there, it was so smoggy that it was weirdly, even though it was full brightness and daylight, it was also, the sky was gray, and it was, but for me, Australia is just this, I can't see properly even, it's so bright, I'm just that's part of it, but I do, enjoy the kind of certain mentality of people, I remember in Perth, we met a bunch of surfers, that were just some local guys from Perth, and I just remember really kind of connecting with those guys, and then and it was the first time it dawned on me. I was like, oh, I get it now. Surfing is about being in the moment. You know what I mean? So it's a bit like being meditating. You know what I mean? It's that's why they're all so spiritual. These surfer guys, they're all kind of, they're kind of doing moving meditation. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It could be that, or it could be just the pot.
Yeah, as well. Yeah, but I think they're kind of complementary. But I think because they're surfers, they, pop can make you just be in. Pop you can just be a lazy slob on the couch playing computer games. But surfing, you got to actually be in the real world. It's like as
Yeah,
real as it gets. You know what I mean?
yeah,
I
totally.
think that pot and reality mix very well. When you're forced to deal with reality on it all the time, pot's fine. You know.
Yeah, I hope that things change and you can get back to Australia
Mm.
with My Bloody Valentine. And I mean, you're not doing anything with Primal Scream ever anymore, are you?
No, not like nothing planned or nothing. No, no, no.
But you had a
Nope.
few visits here with Bobby and co, and they were pretty messy
Mm.
tours. I seem to recall from a viewer's point of view, from a fan's point of
We,
view.
yeah, yeah. It was interesting. It was very weird. There was, especially in that tour in 2000s, I think it was characterized by this weird phenomena where there was a lot of people thinking they were taking ecstasy, but it was actually some kind of LSD type thing. It was more of a big party. They used to call it the Big Day Off Festival because you mostly have days off,
Yeah.
because the travel times between the cities is so long, like you have to fly and, so it's like a day off just to get there. And then it's a day off, before the gig. And you know what I mean? So for every gig, there's like 3 or 4 days off.
Yeah,
It was great. It was a brilliant, best festival.
sounds like it.
Was one of the most fun tours ever.
Yeah, it was an amazing festival while it was around.
Mm,
Um, Kevin Shields, I just want to read you a quote that I read from the Quietus a few years ago. Who I just wanted to get your take on this.
mm,
Um, and they said, "My Bloody Valentine poisoned British guitar rock for more than half a decade and
mm,
left a legacy of laziness from
mm,
which it's never really recovered."
mm.
They're referring to shoegaze,
I guess so.
and what happened in the wake of those two albums you made.
Mm.
What's your take on that, and what happened after those albums in British music, the influence of them?
I don't know, but I do know that, funnily enough, that guy who wrote that, his name is Taylor Parks,
Yep.
and I didn't know he wrote that. I didn't know anything about the guy. It's just some guy, whatever. And then I got interviewed by the Quietus, and the journalist turned up for the interview, and he just seemed to have a very strange attitude, and I couldn't quite grasp why. But I just was myself and did the interview, and then I realized he had come to sort of tear me apart, really, but he didn't in the end. But I didn't know that, you know.
What do you mean tear you apart? For what?
I don't know, because I think he did feel I represented something that he found very, very offensive on some level,
Right.
and which a whole bunch of people, in the UK did. To be honest, you'd be very, very surprised at the efforts some people will go to, literally erase us from history. Literally. I mean, I'm not joking. There was even the BBC4 did a documentary called "Music for Misfits," I think it was
Hmm.
called, and it was basically a 3 hour long documentary of the independent music scene in the UK. And they literally skipped from 1988 till 1993. And some of the journalists that were involved with it, ex-NME journalists, and they were like, yeah, we think rewriting history is a good thing. People shouldn't be subjected to that horrible period. And it's like, wow, they managed to do a 3 hour documentary and mention nobody that existed in that period.
Mm.
So, there's more than enough people out there who were highly offended with what we did and how we did it. They believe music should be good old fashioned. It was set in stone in 1966, and Britpop was manna from heaven for these people. Made everything make sense to them, and anything else doesn't really make any sense to them. So
I think that quote is more about how a lot of the bands that followed you, that took from Loveless, took from the guitar textures and the swirling sounds, did it wrong in some
yeah,
ways.
Well, you can say that.
I'm not
Yeah.
saying that. I'm not saying
Yeah.
that. I think there were a lot of really great bands that came along
Mm.
as part of that shoegaze genre, but
Yeah.
that maybe that's
Well,
what he's saying.
yeah, maybe it is. Maybe it is. But like, compared to what? You know, like, there was a few good records made by some of those bands, like Pulp and Suede, and Blur made Oasis. They all made some good records, but the overall thing was bad. It was a bad period, and yeah, I think whatever. I do understand that, because myself, from my own perspective, what people call shoegaze music, I feel quite distant to, really, and I kind of have to remind people that anything similarity that you see between a band that you might call a shoegazing band and what we do is because they came after us and they did what they did, and it sounds like what we did a bit. You know what I mean? But from our perspective, we did what we did without much knowledge of these people, really. And when we did hear them, we were I was like, well, that's nothing to do with what we're doing. I couldn't see the similarities, to be honest, that much. I can, but I didn't really at the time. I was very obsessed with what I was doing, my own thing. And for me, it was like, if you use a chorus pedal and a flanger and an echo unit and a normal reverb on your music, it's got nothing to do with what we're doing, because we would never do that. But the journalists and the media and people in general were like, "Oh, you're part of the same thing and you sound similar." I'm like, I don't think so, at all, So, and as I said, well, I mean, put it like this: we'd recorded everything we did, even most of the guitars for Loveless, before any of those bands put a record out. Literally, like what we were about was sort of set in stone, and it largely existed before any of those bands were around, and they all came around from 1990, 91, time. And it was, I just thought, I was kind of wishing people wouldn't make a comparison at all. I didn't like it. And funny, in the media, basically, when we did our tour in 91, one of the headlines was, My Buddy Valentine have killed shoegaze. Like, we weren't even seen as part of it. We were just seen as the precursor to it and the end stop to it on that tour. And it was only with time that we became associated with that. And so that's why I find it difficult to answer for anything like that, if you know what I mean. Like, I did feel quite separate, and a little annoyed, maybe even by any comparisons. But I don't care now about anything like that.
So do you think you were misunderstood?
Yeah, to a large degree, by people on purpose, but not really us, because you got to remember, when the thing called shoegazing happened, nobody was calling us a shoegazing band. They were just calling them. It used to be called the Scene That Celebrates Itself, actually, when they first had a name. And when the name shoegazing was created, it was created as a way of putting them down and putting a full stop to that music scene and saying, this is over. That was the idea at the time. It was quite funny, but a very, very important producer or engineer called Alan Mulder, who worked with us and worked with quite a few bands like that, and then went on to work with Smashing Pumpkins and Nine Inch Nails and all sorts of stuff. He happened to be at a festival, and the journalists that were there didn't know who he was, but he was actually the husband of Tony Holiday from Curve, who were also included in that kind of music scene. And he actually heard them discussing how they were going to destroy the whole thing, and literally planning it out and having a big laugh about what they were going to say and what they were going to do. And he felt like he wanted to beat them up. His wife was part of all that, and that it was part of a cynical cycle that existed in British media, that had lasted for a couple of a decade and a half or two, maybe even. But they had a lot of power, and they did create music scenes and then kill them off again, and then give birth to a new one. It was a way of constantly creating a sense of something new is going on. So, as I said, that whole shoegazing thing was, we weren't really seen as part of it, actually, believe it or not. And it was more with time, as time went on, it became more like that, the decades that happened after that, people's perceptions change. And unfortunately, the concept of a narrative, the narrative that people say bands that do this and they've got vocals like a certain way and guitars that are big sounds, loads of effects. And then when people hear us, they think that's what they're hearing. And that can be annoying, sometimes. And funny as well. Recently, I had a very funny situation with people who are really experts in their fields, and they were using a track Only Shallow as an example of use of reverb. And I had to point out to them there's literally zero reverb on that song, like nothing, not one tiny hint of it or anywhere. It's reverb-less. And ambience, there's no ambience on it. Even I record everything super, super dry as possible. But it was just the way it was played and mixed, that gives an impression that they decided that they heard reverb because that's what we're about. So they superimposed it upon what they're hearing.
Yeah.
It's like that. There's an old saying that if somebody is walking in a garden and they go, I see a rose, then they've already robbed themselves of half of the experience of what we're experiencing, because they're superimposing stuff. They're, unfortunately, language superimposes on top of reality that makes you see things and perceive things in ways that are less interesting than they could be if you didn't do that.
I think that also comes back to what we were talking about earlier, that that there's confusion over My Bloody Valentine's music as a listener, and that's the beautiful thing about it as well, that it's not clearly laid out, that you just, as a listener, it's impossible to say what's going on in there, but you feel it. You feel it.
Yeah.
I can't believe we've talked for 4 hours. Really?
Seriously? That surprised me. That's a new record for me.
What time is it in England?
2. It's about 1:57.
2 a.m.
Yeah. Basically.
So you're a night owl.
I am. Yeah. I don't get up till the afternoon, so
right.
It's normal.
Well, I feel lucky to have had so much of your time, and thank you. It's been a real pleasure. That time has gone really quickly. So,
yeah, it did.
Kevin Shields, thank you so much for your time today on Double J.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
Like music that sounds like this?
The sound of the world. Dying in the sun is no fun for anyone.
How about this? What about something that feels like this? Karen Lang brings you music, new and old, that takes you somewhere. Karen Lang curates your musical journey, Monday to Thursday afternoon from 2 on Double J.